It's time for another Bible-thumping Wingnut Google Hangouting podcast with Matt Slick from carm.org. And now, here's your host, Tim, the Bible-thumping Wingnut.
And welcome everybody to another episode of the Bible-thumping Wingnut podcast. This is a Google Hangout.
It's time for another Bible-thumping
I don't
Wingnut.
know. I might get it right once, but I'll never get it right again. I guess I already got that right once, and oh well. Got to learn to turn that thing off. So, it is January 10th. It is NFL wildcard weekend. The Green Bay Packers are about to eliminate the Washington Redskins, and I have the privilege of leading a Google Hangout every Sunday night, and Matt Slick from carm.org is here, as well as Andrew Rappaport. And joining us today for, he'll be sharing his thoughts from time to time, Jason Peterson from Answers for Hope is here as well. And let me just say in the beginning here, how are you, Matt Slick?
Doing all right. How are you guys doing?
I'm good. I'm excited. This should be interesting. We've got a first guest lined up, and I'm glad that Jason's here. Jason hasn't been here, and Matt, you don't know Jason, do you?
No.
We've crossed paths a few times. That's about it.
He's got his ministry at Answers for Hope, and he's going to seminary, and he's a great...
Which seminary?
Whitfield Theological Seminary.
Whitfield. So you Reformed?
Yes.
Cool.
Very much so.
Good for you. I am too.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Jason's a good guy.
Yes? That's not what you were just saying.
Well, yeah. Well, he knows he's a bad person, I guess we'll put it that way.
Romans 3, 10, 11, and 12.
Only sinners go to church.
Oh, that's why I go.
So in a way of kicking off this broadcast, of course, those of you who are watching, you can join. The link to join is in the description of this Google Hangout. And also, if you want to join the chat, the link to join the chat on Mixler is there as well. That being said, a couple weeks ago, Matt Slick was engaged with somebody. Maybe it was last week. I'm not sure. Matt, you were engaged with somebody who said that you didn't know logic and you needed to get some good training on logic. And
okay. Yep.
And you actually said, "Hey, you'd be glad to have that happen."
Sure, I'm always learning. I always like it when people who don't agree with me help me see things more clearly and help improve my arguments.
That being said, somebody's been engaging with me for quite a few weeks, if not months, with hopes to join and engage with a conversation with you. Alex is here, and he's from the UK, I believe. He's from over somewhere where it's very late right now, which is why he hasn't been able to make it. But he heard the broadcast when somebody was arguing with you about logic, and he wanted to come and discuss with you what he sees as the things that you don't know about logic. So
sounds good.
That being said, Alex, I think you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Alex, welcome to the Bible Thumping Wingnut podcast.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Alice, it's nice to meet you. We've been exchanging online.
Yeah. Hi, Andrew. Good evening. How's it going?
You have an awesome accent.
Thank you very much. So I think there's this Christopher Hitchens line about sounding cleverer with a British accent. So I guess...
Yes. It adds 20 points to your IQ.
Yeah, right. So I'm winning already then. In that case.
What's the picture behind you? I'm just curious.
You know what? That's actually just some wrapping paper. My girlfriend decided to frame it. It's nice, isn't it?
It looks cool.
Yeah.
I thought it was some Hebrew or something.
No, it's just a pattern. I think it's birds. Yeah.
No, what you could do is you could just say to somebody, well, if you can figure it out, then we'll talk. And then just leave it because it's just a.
I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah.
Just birds.
When
Okay. Andrew seems to have frozen. Anyway, can I just say thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm actually a fan. I listen quite often. I'm not a Christian. Well, this is going to be controversial, but it depends on how you define it, right? But I'm an atheist. I don't know whether we'll get into a conversation about what that means, but
I was going to ask you what kind.
Well, yeah, good question. Do you want to do that now?
No, just, strong atheist, weak atheist, or just you lack evidence, whatever. I'm not going to tackle all that because I'm here to talk about something else. So.
Yeah, okay. So let me say then that I certainly lack a belief in any God concept or whatever. I'm not religious in any sense. I also think it's fair to say that I have a strong degree of belief that God doesn't exist. I wouldn't say I'm 100% certain about that fact, but I feel relatively, I wouldn't bet my house on it, but I'd bet a pound on it.
No, but you're betting your soul on it, so, okay.
Maybe I am, maybe I'm not.
You are.
Yeah, well.
You're betting your soul either way. Because if he doesn't exist, then you win the bet. If he does exist, you lose. If he doesn't, you win, so to speak. You made a bet. We'll see what the final hand shows.
Well, so that's Pascal's wager in a sense, right? Pascal's wager.
Oh yeah, Pascal's wager I think had legitimacy to it. I understand the rebuttal. Well, which God? Well, that's all the more reason to focus, because if God exists, then you better find out who he is, because eternity is a long time to be wrong.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not 100% sure that he doesn't exist. I haven't, if he's there, come and get me. I'm not saying that he doesn't exist. I'm not coming against him.
I want to say something at this point, because I was thinking about something a few days ago, and no offense to you, none meant at all. This is a theological comment, and I was thinking about this, and then I thought, wait a minute. So Andrew and others, we're all reformed in our theology, and again, not being disrespectful to you, not intending that at all, Alex.
That's
but
fine,
I was thinking, why doesn't God reveal himself to the unbelievers more? And it just flashed in my head. Why would God reveal himself to the non-elect? And I thought that might be an interesting discussion to have later. If they're not elect, why would he reveal himself to them? Just, see what I'm saying? I'm not saying you're elect or not elect, Alex. But
well, I would probably say that Romans 1 that he has.
Yeah, but that's not election. That's just general revelation.
Yeah.
But if someone's not chosen from the foundational world for salvation, and they say, "Well, show yourself to me," and they prove it. You're not elected. You're not going to show himself to him. It's just a thought. We could talk about that some other time. I was like, I wonder.
Yeah, anyway. I have a lot to say about that actually, so that'd be interesting.
I think it'd be a good discussion to have. Not next week, because next week they'll be flying in from Houston. I got a debate out there.
Well, we should engage with Alex since he's staying up for us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that, by the way, Alex. Thanks for staying up.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I read your article.
Okay, good.
But let's just say I read most of it, and I know, I got a buddy here, so I was working with him on some stuff. So I went through it, but I did not have more than a half hour to go through it and analyze it. And
okay,
so
that's cool. Yeah, absolutely.
But so I liked it.
On that blog. I have 2 articles on that blog. One of them is in reference to you in particular. The other one, I think is probably more significant, realistically. And so, I mean, if you weren't going to spend any time reading my blog, I would suggest that you read the other one. I mean, maybe, I don't know if we could talk about it another time or something, but I think that one's more fundamental. This one is just about the form of an argument that you've used in the past. The other one is about presuppositional apologetics in fundamental. It's a meta-analysis, really.
Yeah, I'd like to discuss presuppositionalism with you sometime.
Yeah, great.
I was going through it, and okay, that's something else. And I was going through a couple things actually I thought were interesting. One was I've always wondered, and I'm just being straight. I've always wondered if there was a flaw buried in my my argument because of a. Well, no, I've always wondered because if it's a true dichotomy, and then you use a disjunctive syllogism, does it work in all cases? And I haven't thought that through enough to know if it works in all cases. And so that's just a curiosity. I was reading through your stuff, and I actually, this is funny. You said blah blah blah, and I said, well, why don't I put in my notes I just copied your article, scanned through some stuff, and I thought I had to focus on a little bit because I didn't have enough time. And I thought, well, then why not say it this way? And then later on, you said it. Well, I said it because you already wrote it first. I said it exactly, word for word, except for one comma. I didn't put a comma in what you did, but exactly word for word the way you worded it later.
Good. Okay.
And so I thought that was good.
So maybe it would be helpful for people who haven't read my blog. Most people haven't read my blog, presumably. I could just summarize what I was saying about how I see the argument, and then what my critique was of the argument. So sure. I diagnosed a very specific fallacy, I suppose, and maybe I could just explain that, and then see what your response is to that. Maybe So let me just say at the outset, like I'm not coming on here with one of those kind of, my worldview can beat up your worldview kind of like macho fight thing. I don't really want to have a fight or something. It'd be quite nice to have a constructive discussion, right? But so this is a critique of your argument in the sense of like what you would get if you were presenting it in a philosophy department. You'd give your paper, then someone would stick their hand up and they'd say, here seems to me a fallacy or some kind of structural flaw in the way that you've presented the argument. They wouldn't be saying, you're stupid, everything you believe in is wrong, my worldview is right, your worldview is wrong. It's not as confrontational as that. It's like an analysis of what's going on. So I just want that to be, so we don't misunderstand each other. That's where I'm coming from.
Alex, could you give your credentials so that folks who are watching or listening can know your background, who you are?
Yeah, okay. So I've got an undergraduate master's degree and a PhD in philosophy. My PhD thesis was in sort of metaphysics and philosophical logic. So I looked at temporal logic in particular. So my published work in philosophy is on the problem of future contingents in a modern setting. So the problem of future contingents is like, can there be predictions of future events? Aristotle's example is if you say there will be a sea battle tomorrow. It seems that if it's true now that there will be a sea battle tomorrow, then you couldn't prevent the sea battle from taking place. And it seems that just the mere truth of the prediction in advance of the thing happening makes it logically necessary that the thing will happen. There's an argument for fatalism, right? Just the truth of predictions. So sorry, I'm getting kind of sidetracked. It doesn't really matter what my thesis was about. Anyway, it was a logic metaphysics thesis that I wrote, and then I was a lecturer in philosophy for a few years. Although I don't do that professionally now. But I mean, I'm a natural philosopher by inclination. I'm always thinking about things. These days, I have the opportunity to listen to podcasts and such, which is where I don't know why, I stumbled into philosophy of religion as an interest, and I found my way quickly to presuppositional apologetics because it's very philosophical by nature, unlike, say, creationism or some other. I say intelligent design is like a biology-specific apologetic, perhaps. So I don't know anything about biology or physical sciences in particular, but I do know lots about philosophy. So when I found Van Til and Rick Bronson and people like that, they're talking about philosophical concepts, knowledge, Platonism, blah, blah, blah. So that my interest, and it was a very different type of argument. So
okay.
I set my mind thinking about this for the last year or so.
Okay, let's get to your article because I found it quite interesting. I read through the whole thing, And I found it quite interesting that you agree with Matt on many points that most atheists who come on will disagree, and Matt will never get past the first 2 points. And
Okay.
you actually agree with him. So I think it would be good for you to go right through what you've said in your article, and then to the point.
Okay, good. Yeah,
disagreement.
cool. All right, let's cut to it then. So the way I see it, I've heard Matt say this argument several times, is it goes something like, let's just try and say this as charitably as possible. The way that I see it is that you say something like, it's kind of only two options, that either God exists or God doesn't exist, something like this. This is a dichotomy. It's got to be one thing or the other. And then there's this sort of similar proposition, which is either God accounts for the transcendental nature of the laws of logic or something, or not God accounts for logic, say, for shorthand. And then you use disjunctive syllogism, which is an argument form from propositional logic, which just says either P or Q, and then doesn't matter which one you do, but you negate one of them and then you conclude with the other. So either P or Q, not P, therefore Q. That's the argument form disjunctive syllogism. And so you kind of plug in the first premise, which is, say, either God accounts for the laws of logic or not God accounts for the laws of logic. And then we have this kind of support for the premise, the second premise being, it's not the case that the not God position accounts for the laws of logic, which is where you run through, well, it couldn't be linguistic constructions, they couldn't be just dependent on human minds thinking about them, we can vote on them as such and such. And then it seems to lead to the idea, well, none of those options account for the laws of logic. And you say, well, because we've excluded, therefore, the non-God account of logic, because of disjunctive syllogism, if you've eliminated one of the options, then therefore you can conclude the other one, right? So that seems to be the argument. Therefore, God accounts for the laws of logic. Now, the way I see it is that argument itself really is just a support for a larger transcendental argument, right? The transcendental argument just says something like, let me see, make sure I get this right, that God is a necessary precondition for the intelligibility of logic. Logic is intelligible, therefore God exists. And what you're doing by saying that only God can account for the laws of logic is providing support for the premise that God is the necessary precondition for the intelligibility of logic. Like there couldn't be any other. So what you're doing is saying that it's not just simply a sufficient condition for the intelligibility of logic, but God is the necessary condition. What you need to do to establish that clause is to show that there couldn't be any other account. And I see that that's what your disjunctive syllogism argument is doing implicitly, is providing support for the transcendental argument. So what this is a tributary of the main argument. And anyway, so that's how I see your argument. Now, just to pause here before I say what I think is wrong with what you're doing, do you agree with me up to this point on my reflection on what you're doing in the argument?
Yeah, it reflects it pretty well.
Yeah? Okay, good. So let me just have a drink of water one sec. So
I would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Because I think we need to start before you and Mr. Slick start going back and forth about this. We need to define what is meant by logic.
Do you want to do that, Matt, or do you want me to do that?
No, let's just keep going through. Well, because logic is just a process of the mind of proper inference, and logic requires certain parameters. Otherwise, we're not being logical. Those laws of logic, and basically that's just it. Logic is a process of the mind. Though some say you can have a silicon chip with electricity and it produce logic, but another discussion.
So I would probably give a slightly different definition for logic there. I mean, I think maybe we're deciding the contentious issue by saying that it's a process of the mind in the definition. We don't want it to just be a matter of definition, that your argument's correct. I would say that logic is the science, or at least study, of valid inference. I think that would be the textbook definition. But, I think we're basically in agreement on what logic is anyway, whether or not we'd say the same.
Well, I have no problem with that. You're the one with the PhD in this stuff, so no problem.
All right, good. So anyway, we're on the same page up till now, right? So if my my analysis would be as follows. I say that essentially you're either committing the fallacy of false dichotomy, or if you repair the argument so as to avoid the fallacy of false dichotomy, you end up committing the fallacy of begging the question. I suppose that I feel strongest on, if we repair the argument, then it's logically provable that it's begging the question. I mean, it actually reduces the argument to being equivalent to saying P, therefore P, which is simply to say that it's...
Yeah, I was following that, but I was having a problem with a triple negation.
Okay. Well, the triple negation is just a negation.
No, well, a negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative again is a negative.
Negative, yeah, exactly.
So a triple negative is a negative.
Yeah.
So, where was I? Because I like the Reconstruction because I'm actually tickled because I was reading through what you're saying. I actually wrote, except for the comma, exactly what you wrote. Either God can account for the laws of logic, or it is not the case that God can account for the laws of logic.
Yeah, okay, good. So if the argument's framed like that...
That's the right way to frame it. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would agree. And I've said it like that different ways many times, but I don't have the precision that you would have in terminology and stuff like that, which I have no problem getting better at. No problem at all.
Okay, so let's be clear about it then. If the argument is framed like that, then the form of the argument is first premise, P or not P, and the second premise is the negation of either of those two options. And then
this is where we're having a problem. Is P or not P is in the text. It's this or this.
P or not P. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
So P or not P being the first premise. Now the problem is that disjunctive syllogism works. The sort of the general idea of how it works is you say, take one of the options and negate it, and then you can conclude the other option. But the problem is if the first premise is P or not P, now they are already just simply one of them is the negation of the other. They're both the negation of the other. So, and that's why it becomes trivial if you use disjunctive syllogism and have this P or not P, i.e. a true dichotomy as the first premise. Because
what do you mean by trivial? I didn't understand that when you wrote that.
Trivial means that the argument is equivalent to saying P, therefore P. Well, obviously that follows, but that's not an argument, right? It's just simply asserting that P and then saying therefore P, right? Okay. So if you said to me, here's my argument that God exists, right? Premise one, God exists. Conclusion, God exists. I would say, that's no argument that God exists. You're just saying that he exists and then concluding that he does.
Yeah, I understand that. But P or not P doesn't do that. It's just not P by itself.
So if you say P or not P, now we've got two ways of doing disjunctive syllogism. Depends how you want to, you pick either of those two, P or not P, to be the second.
We just do, for me and others, could we just do God and not God?
Well, I'd rather we were clear about it and say that the proposition is God exists, or it's not the case that God exists.
Right.
Because that's
we can shorthand it with God or not God.
Okay.
We just agree that it's the case that God exists, or it's not the case that God exists.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Okay. So God or not God. That's the first premise. Now, for the second premise, it's up to you, but you pick one of those two options, God or not God, and you negate it. So you stick a not in front of it. So
that means God. Right.
Well, let's pick the first option. Right. So the first option is God.
Right.
If we use that, then that means that we negate that option and we conclude the other option. So, so let's do that then. So it's God or not God, first premise. Now the second premise is we pick the first option and we negate it. So that's not God. And then the conclusion is the other option, but that's not God as well. So that means that we've got second premise is not God and the conclusion is not God.
But it's not a formula.
What do you mean it's not a formula?
You have to bear with me because I'm going to just tell you, I don't understand all the stuff you're saying all the time, but Okay,
fair
I've
enough.
not studied it. I'm a theologian, but I don't mind learning. I love it when non-believers teach me stuff. I don't have any problem learning. Okay, so a formula is A equals A. So to keep the balance, what you do to one side of the equation, you do to the other side of the equation, so that it's always true. So if we do A minus 1, we have to take negative 1 to the other side as well. Then we have consistency. So the or is not an equal in this. So that's why I'm saying it's not a formula. And please bear with me. I'm just trying to understand. These are the things I would ask in class. I'd go, now wait a minute. Let me ask something. I'm trying to understand.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'd say, if you're going to say the negation of one, why not also say the negation of the other? But I understand what you're saying, because Matt, you're going to say, because that's what you're doing. You'll say we have two options, and we're negating one of them, the other must be validated. And so I understand that, but something's not clicking in my head about this.
Okay, so maybe I can give a different example.
I understand what you're saying, though. I do. Okay, I understand when you say, if you negate God, then you say, you negate the first premise, you say not God or not God. I understand what you're saying there.
So I think it's easier to maybe putting God in there in a way is a bit of a distraction, because you're thinking about God and you're not thinking about the form of the argument. So if I was to say to you, toast or not toast, right? Second premise. Now I'm going to pick one of those two options. So it's like saying that I'm either drinking whiskey or I'm drinking vodka. Well, I'm not drinking vodka, therefore I'm drinking whiskey.
Right. That's a false dichotomy.
Well, it doesn't matter. Let's forget that for the moment. All the point is that if the first premise is true, it is true that I'm either drinking vodka or whiskey, and it's also true that I'm not drinking vodka, then it obviously follows logically that I'm drinking whiskey.
Right. Absolutely correct.
But now if I say I'm either drinking whiskey or I'm not drinking whiskey, and then so just to run the same thing again, but I negate the option that I'm drinking whiskey, so I say I'm not drinking whiskey. But to follow the same pattern of reasoning, we would have to conclude the other option. The other option was that I'm not drinking whiskey, because I started off by saying either I'm drinking whiskey or I'm not drinking whiskey. Second premise, I'm not drinking whiskey. Then my conclusion is I'm not drinking whiskey. Now the problem with that argument is really there's nothing wrong with it apart from the fact that the second premise is the conclusion. And as you know, I think, but if you have as a premise your conclusion, that's begging the question. That's the textbook definition of begging the question. It also means we could forget about the first premise because we have the conclusion as the second premise. So we could just say, look, I'm not drinking whiskey, therefore I'm not drinking whiskey. Well, it's valid. Obviously, it's valid, but it doesn't tell you anything. It's trivial. Obviously, every proposition follows from itself. And what I'm saying about your argument is if you reconstruct it so that it's God exists or it's not the case that God exists, you have to negate one of those options and conclude the other. But if you negate one of those two options and conclude the other, you have put the other option in as the second premise. Now maybe it will take a while for you to, I don't know, look at it.
I understand that. I understand what you're saying.
Symbolic logic is much easier to see than to hear.
But I just don't know if that's the right thing to do.
Well, so if you reconstruct the argument along the way that you initially said, that's exactly the way that it should be done, either God exists or God doesn't exist, right? Then it's provable logically that the argument boils down to just saying God exists, therefore God exists. I mean, that's not up for negotiation. That's like...
door? Nick? Sorry, my wife.
That's fine.
Oh, okay. No one's listening. You want to hear this, Nick? I'll put it on my earphone. You want to hear it, though? Yeah? Oh, sorry. My wife was there. Sorry.
It's okay.
She's there. She's listening. She said it was loud.
Okay.
He's got a British accent.
Good evening. Hello.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
And we can see that he's not drinking whiskey, or he's drinking, it looks like wine or some water, so...
I am drinking whiskey.
Really?
Yeah.
We saw water earlier.
Yeah, both. So anyway, like my point is that you sort of want. I think that you want to say I'm arguing through disjunctive syllogism, and I'm using the strongest possible disjunction, one that couldn't possibly be doubted, to stop people with the charge, oh, it's a false dichotomy. And you say, well, no, it's not a false dichotomy. It's a true dichotomy. It's the truest possible dichotomy, a logical dichotomy. And that's where you've got to. I can see where you've gone there, because nobody can deny P or not P. It's a tautology, at least in classical logic, let's say. But the problem is if you do that, then, like I said, it's logically provable, according to the rules of classical logic, that the argument then just sort of evaporates. It turns into P, therefore P, or alternatively not P, therefore not P. So you don't want to go on.
I need to interrupt you here. I'm not trying to be rude because you get me going. Okay, so
Yeah.
if I was in class, I'd be like this all the time. I always did that in class. Well, wait a minute. What about this? What about this? What about that? So it's not because I'm arguing. It's because I'm trying to understand.
Mm-hmm.
What you're saying is, from now on, I'll just interrupt you when I say, excuse me, and because now I forgot what I was going to say. So, but I don't want to be rude to you. That's what I'm saying.
So I said that there's two fallacies at play. So we looked at the second one, which is it's begging the question. Now, I think that happens if you reconstruct the argument so that you've got a true dichotomy. True dichotomy isn't a real term. It's a dichotomy, and true dichotomy mean the same thing. The false dichotomy is the name of a fallacy, but there's no such thing as a true dichotomy. That's not.
Well, we would agree that God exists, or it is not the case that God exists. It's a true dichotomy.
Well, it's a dichotomy. That's all there is. It's just anyway. It doesn't matter. I'm picking hair. Yeah, it doesn't make any difference. Yes,
it's a logically valid dichotomy, and there's no third option.
Dichotomy. There's no third option.
Okay,
at least
good.
in classical logic, yes, that's true.
All right. So then we're going to say that we only have two possibilities.
Yes, there's a logical space, like a Venn diagram, if you like, and we've cut it in half, and therefore it split it into two exhaustive and exclusive regions. Covers all possibilities. You're right. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So in the case of the transcendental laws of logic, okay?
Yeah.
LOL, laws of logic. How about that? Would you? Let me ask you. I'm trying to, because this will help me. Would you agree with me to say that God exists, or it is not the case that God exists? Those two options, that the necessary preconditions for intelligibility, whatever we want to, I know about the issue of what does a count mean. I understand that, but is it not still true then that those are the only two options we have to work with to account for, to give rational justification for these laws of logic?
No, so I say no as the answer to that question. Straightforwardly no.
Why not?
And I can explain that. So if that were true, so you can start off with, well, look, I'm carving logical space in half with a dichotomy, either God exists or not the case that God exists. Therefore, one of them must account for the laws of logic. That's what you're saying. But I can carve logical space up any number of ways, right? I can say it's either the case that toast exists or it's not the case that toast exists. Therefore, either toast accounts for the transcendental laws of logic or not toast accounts for the transcendental
But that's correct. It's not toast that accounts for them. That's true.
How does the absence of toast account for the laws of logic?
It's not, but that's what I was noticing in your thing here. Because now I want to argue with you, but not to argue. I want to argue to learn, seriously.
Yeah, okay, fine, good.
You understand that, right? When you said the absence of, I noticed that. Let me find that, because I made a note. Absence. The absence of toast cannot account for the laws of logic. And I wrote, well, is that true? Because it doesn't negate all other options. Is it the state of being absent? But my notes are, I was just going fast. But how does a state of absence do anything? It's a non sequitur to say the absence of that. It can't. So the absence of it can't do anything. So it's like the absence. It's not an option. There's nothing there for it to be an actuality, to be a condition, to be anything. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, so then what we're talking about is that the accounting for relation, X accounts Y, can't take an empty descriptor. So you can't say, the empty set accounts for the laws of logic. That doesn't follow, right? Something has to stand in some kind of possibly non-logical relation to the thing that it accounts for. So let's say so if you say to me something like, my house burned down yesterday, what accounts for the house burning down? Well, I'm going to take that to be something like a causal requirement, like why did my house burn down? I'm going to say, well, was there faulty electrics? Now that would account for it. Did you set the fire on purpose for insurance claim? That would account for it. Did I come and burn it down on purpose to hurt you? That would account for it. So these are causal explanations. But you couldn't get that by just saying, you know, either I set fire to it on purpose or I didn't set fire to it on purpose. One of those two accounts for it. The second one, the negation, doesn't account for it. It's not it can't stand in a causal relation to the thing that we're trying to account for. You see what I mean?
Okay, yeah, but I'm still having a problem with it, and I'm trying to politely argue and disagree, but without being obstreperous. I'm just not following that.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote in their text, the ball or not the ball is the cause of the house burning down.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
So we know that it would not be the ball. I mean, we're not talking about some alien ball with a, you know, a lightsaber coming out of it. We're just talking, okay, ball. Okay, so the case is it was not the ball that caused. We know that that is true. We know that the ball can't cause a house to burn down. It's just sitting there. So we know that it is not. It's true. It's not the ball.
So let's not slip back into the logical dichotomy. Did the ball account for the house burning down, or was it not the case that the ball accounts for the?
It was not the case.
Well, yeah, but you don't want to
true.
go there because I showed you just a moment ago. If you go there, then your argument, I checkmate you essentially. The argument becomes trivial if you go there. What you want to do is say either the ball or the absence of the ball, either the ball or not the ball accounts for the house burning down. Not either the ball accounts for the house burning down or it's not the case that the ball accounts for the house burning down. It's where the negation goes.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
Yeah?
I do. I understand. Because you're negating the phrase. You're saying not the ball. That's a phrase, and you're negating that. So then you have not, which is a double negative, which is affirming the positive. So it's in tautologous. That's what you're doing.
Am I negating the ball, or am I negating the ball accounts for the burning of the house? So here's an example from the history of philosophy, which anyone who's done any analytic philosophy would be familiar with. But Bertrand Russell uses this as an example to explain exactly the thing that we are discussing here. It's called a scope distinction, right? The wide scope, where the negation negates the whole proposition. It's not the case that the ball accounts for the house burning down. And narrow scope, not ball accounts for the house burning down. Right? And Russell's example is he says something like either the king of France, present king of France, is bald, and you're going to say, well, no, that's not true. And so it seems like the negation of that would be, okay, well, in that case, the present king of France has hair. Obviously, there isn't no king of France, right? France is a republic, he doesn't have a king. So it's not the case, you know, negating the king of France is bald it's not the case that the king of France is bald, not that the king of France has hair. So the wide scope negates the whole proposition, the king of France is bald, and the narrow scope just negates whether or not he has hair. Does that make it clear? No. Does that make it less?
Because can I reconstruct this a little bit? Because this is where I'm getting stuck. So I'm going to put two sentences in, and I capitalize the emphasis. The ball is the cause of the house burning down, and the other option is the ball is not the cause of the house burning down.
Okay, yeah.
And we would know that the second one is correct.
Yeah, so that I would call that wide scope negation. You've negated the entire premise. In fact, the not appears in the middle of the sentence. The ball is not the cause of the house burning down. But really what you mean is it's not the case that, open brackets, the ball is the case of the house burning down, close brackets.
But isn't this true? Are both not both statements are true. We know the first one's false, and the second one, let me put the number 1 in there. But the first one is false. The second one is true.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, let me type in the narrow scope negation then, right?
Okay.
Let me just figure out how to do that. Right.
I have a question.
Yep.
What if it's a fireball?
Put your hand in front of your face. And then
Right. Do you see what I said in the?
Can you read it for those who are not here in the group for the chat?
Yeah. So it says not ball is the cause of the house burning down. Right, so all I'm doing is negating the ball. I'm not saying, I mean still essentially what I'm doing is I'm agreeing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So that's the crucial thing that we need to distinguish for the penny to drop between what I'm saying, between why this isn't an instance of a dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy, right? And the penny needs to drop here for you to see this. So on the one case, you've got the ball is the case, it is the cause of the house burning down, and the negation of that, the ball is not the cause of the house burning down. And then that's a true dichotomy. False dichotomy is the ball is the cause of the house burning down, and the negation, the false negation being not ball, is the cause of the house.
False negation confuses me because that's two negatives.
No, it's not about there being two negatives. It's about what am I negating? I'm simply negating the ball. I'm saying there's not a ball.
Right.
An absence of a ball is the thing that caused the house to burn.
So what I typed in there, 1 and 2, is correct, and we would say
that's a genuine dichotomy. Yeah.
So we would say number 2 is the true statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I said, not ball, is the cause of the house burning down. It's the equivalent of saying not God can account for the transcendental laws of logic. And you seem to say.
Oh, wait a minute. Not all is the God.
Alex, are you saying the issue is over what we negate?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So Matt said either God or not God, and then he says, right, one of those two must account for the transcendental laws of logic. And I'm just simply saying, no. The options may be that they don't necessarily provide any of the options. I mean, so for instance,
but if we say either God exists or God does not exist,
yeah,
that's valid, correct?
That's an instance of P or not P. So it's
Okay.
tautology. That's true. Yeah.
Now, in the case, if you can prove one of them, either one of them, false, does that immediately make the other true? In that scenario, just that.
Well, because those two are the negation of each other. So if one of them is false, then the other one is true. That's just the matter of the fact. Yeah, definitely.
So the true disjunctive syllogism.
Well, yes.
That is redundant to say that, but yeah.
Yeah. But my point is that, so if I said to you, look, toast or not toast, right, there's no third option, either toast or not toast. So therefore, and it seems to me quite obvious that not toast, the absence of toast, like the atoastist, the person who doesn't believe in toast, right, that in itself isn't a position which can account for the laws of logic. But that doesn't mean that the person who believes in toast.
Yeah, I'm listening, and I'm beginning to wonder if there's not an equivocation on the word cause. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just trying to understand, and because we have not ball is the cause, and we have the cause is not the ball. Those are different sentences, are similar, but they have a different nuance to them. And not ball is the cause. Because I have 1 and 2 up there. Where did I put them? Yeah, the ball is the cause of the house burning down. The ball is not the cause of the house burning down. So we would know that number 2 is the correct answer. So as he was saying, as Andrew was saying, we only have these 2 possibilities. And so in this case, that's a true dichotomy, and disjunctive syllogism validly works. And so we know that number 2, we know that number 1 is not possible. So number 2 must be the case.
Yeah.
So far so good.
Yep. Absolutely.
So we could say something like God is the cause of the universe, or God is not the cause of the universe, for example. Okay.
And I would say 2 is right, and you would say 1 is right. There we go. Okay. But one of us has to be right there. But if you said God is the cause of the universe or not God is the cause of the universe, like either God's the cause of the universe or nothing is the cause of the universe.
That's it. That's what I'm thinking. Yes, because I wrote it in my notes. That's exactly what I was writing because you said, I'm going to just put my notes in here, the whole shebang right here without having to get into it either toast or not toast, and you said the absence of toast cannot account for the laws of logic, and I wrote, is that true, question mark. This is my notes. This is not cogent, not all edited, because it doesn't negate all other options. Is it the state of being absent? But how does a state of absence do anything? There's nothing wrong there. This is what I was thinking. To say the absence of something is a cause, that's where the confusion comes in for me, because absence just means nothing's there, but you can't attribute causation to nothingness. That's
Okay,
where I'm
so
getting confused.
let's like literally
See what I'm
focus on
saying?
exactly the issue that you always talk about, which is, can the Christian, whatever Calvinist, Reformed, whatever position you want to take, that position, can that account for the laws of logic? And then you say, well, it's either got to be my position or it's got to be the atheist position. And the reason for that is because either God exists or he doesn't. Now, that you've slipped between the slick slip, maybe you slipped between. I agree that, you know, obviously God exists or he doesn't, but I don't agree that you know, that means that either the Christian position accounts for laws of logic or the atheist position accounts for laws of logic. That's really where
Right. That's not a true dichotomy.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. So when you say, but this whole argument though is you saying, you know, it's either my Christian position or it's your atheist position. But then, but no, now we've got loads of options though that you're, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree.
Dangling the tautology, well, either God or
Right.
not. You know,
But
right, and
Alex, would this be? Okay, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was going to say, because that's absolutely true what you just said, Alex. And I've hopefully many times have said, look, I know that there are other options. There's the Hindu God, there's the Buddha God, or whatever, all these other options. I'm only going to argue from the Christian perspective. We could argue about those, but I said I'm only going to argue with the Christian one. And I actually remember saying recently, I'm only going to argue that in contrast with the atheistic position. Hence, I'm going to say God and not God. I've had atheists go, okay, I understand what you're saying. Because I, logically speaking, yes, I understand there's other possibilities on paper, but I'm not going to argue those. Since the atheist, you and I would agree that all the other ones don't exist, okay, I'm not saying you're positively affirming they don't, but I'm going to just say functionally they don't exist. They're not part of the equation of actuality and causation.
Okay. Yeah.
Then, so we agree about all of them except for this one, the Christian one. And that's where our argument comes in. So I've narrowed it down for that reason.
Yeah, that's on one issue that we disagree, right? But maybe we also disagree on which ice cream flavor is nice. I like vanilla, you like chocolate. Well,
that's actually correct.
Okay, well, but does one of those account for logic? Who's to say? No, right. But why should
it's not a true dichotomy. Either ice cream accounts for the laws of logic or doesn't.
But why should God or not? Why should Christianity or atheism account for logic? Why should either of those account for logic?
Well, that's a digression, because I try to get into that by saying that I'm only going to argue for the Christian God. And yes, I understand that there are other views of who God is.
I'm saying what I'm saying. Like, so yeah, I know that you're arguing for the Christian God. You're also arguing for chocolate ice cream, right? And I'm arguing for atheism and vanilla ice cream. But there's still another step. You need to say something about why why one distinction, God, atheism, matters to logic, whereas chocolate and vanilla doesn't.
Chocolate and vanilla are preferences and subjective, but the idea of God existing would be objective.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with the existence of logic?
That's the question.
That's the question I'm asking you.
Well, I would say I just jump to the end of the line or the front of the line and just say, because logic is a process of the mind, the laws of logic are by nature conceptual and they're transcendental, so therefore it implies a transcendental absolute mind.
Right. So now I think that we can just, for the time being, park the discussion about whether God exists or God doesn't exist, or whether I'm arguing for atheism or you're arguing for Christianity. Just look at, well, what is it about logic that makes you think that it has to be conceptual? So okay, let me just have, like, if you don't mind, just maybe 2 minutes to just run 4 positions by you, which I think are what really philosophers consider to be the options for the metaphysics of logic, right? And I don't think atheism, Christianity is relevant in this discussion at all, but maybe you can explain to me how it is, right?
Okay.
So Platonism, for one, the first option, right? Platonism, rightly or wrongly associated with Plato's actual views, says something like there exist abstract objects, which non-spatiotemporal things, numbers, the concept of redness, whatever, justice, truth, beauty, whatever. We could just say that law of non-contradiction is up there in Platonic heaven as well, and somehow magically, more or less, who cares? It just has some way of controlling and fixing the logical options are available. You know, why is it that numbers reach out of Platonic heaven and instantiate themselves in this transient earthly realm? Who knows?
That's actually something I've been wondering about recently.
Well, whatever. The Platonist will give you a story to say. He'll fill that out in some way. It's up to the Platonist to fill that back out.
Right.
That's one option, right? That there are these transcendent, immaterial beings, much like the traditional concept of God. Apart from the fact that they're not personal, they're just out there, unchanging, embodying these concepts for us to refer to when we say numbers and laws of logic. And that's one option. Second
Platonism.
option. Yeah, Platonism. The second option, I'm going to say that just to pick a philosopher from the history of philosophy that roughly associates with this. So let's say Kant. Leibniz or Boole would do equally well, but this is a conceptualist. He says something like the laws of logic. When you say, why is it that the law of non-contradiction seems to apply everywhere and all the time, and it's unavoidable? Why is it? Whence this sort of strange character of logic? Well, Kant's answer would be something like, roughly, very roughly, something like, well, your thoughts are, you're kind of running up against the limits of your thoughts, right? You've drilled down to the core programming instruction that just, the syntax of however that you were coded, and it just said that there. That's like the limits of your thought. You are programmed to think that way. And Kant would call it synthetic a priori concept. It's something that you can't but think through. Right? You have to see the world like that. So there are these rose-tinted glasses that you have to see the world through, but you can't take them off. Right? They're welded to your face. So you don't really know if the world looks rose-tinted, but you have to see it as if it is. Right? It's just a product of your mind or something. Everybody's built like that. That's just what thought is like. That's the conceptualist answer. Then
that's conceptualism. Okay.
Yeah. And the third option.
I think that's problematic.
Okay, but I know I've heard you say your arguments against that. But the third position would be roughly associated with, say, Wittgenstein or something, where you say, whence this strange logical necessity. He doesn't say that it's because there's these Platonic objects or because we're butting up against the limits of thought, but he says something like, it's the limits of language. Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, the 20th century Austrian philosopher, and he said, more or less glossing to the point of which, it's making me cringe to have to summarize it so quickly because he's such a great philosopher, but something like it's about the limits of language. Right? Where our language is programmed like that, you cannot describe a situation coherently without using these basic laws or something, right? So why is it that the law of non-contradiction seems to apply? It's just that if you don't use the law of non-contradiction, you're not really describing anything. So, it's not to say that it really applies to reality, but it certainly does say that it applies to the limits of our language. So that's the third option, the linguistic option. Now, the fourth option is Aristotle says something like, why, someone wants to be shown why the law of non-contradiction applies. Well, you can't. There's just no explanation for it. It's non-demonstrable. Like there's just nothing that explains. Like it's so foundational. Maybe it's because it's metaphysically valid or something. But basically, asking for an explanation for it just shows ignorance of your. It shows your ignorance for asking. It's something like the way that physicists may say something like, if you go, well, what happened before the Big Bang? And they'll just say, well, look, time does. It's a conceptual category error. There's no such time before the Big Bang, so you can't ask what happened before the Big Bang. It's like you say, well, why is the law of non-contradiction applicable? Well, it's category error. There's no explanation for it. It just is. Like that's the fourth option. So we've got this Platonism, conceptualism, linguisticism, and brute factism or something, where there's just no explanation for it.
Which are you?
I'm curious. I don't know what the answer is, right? But these are the categories that philosophers have charted. Now, I don't understand.
You don't know why. Those are the four ones. Do you hold to any one of them or a combination of them?
I'm not convinced on any of them. I wouldn't bet my house on any of them. No, I don't know which one's true. But my question to you is, why should I, sell me now, give me your pitch, why God is relevant to this discussion?
Okay. Would you agree with me that logic is a process of the mind?
Well, no, because I just gave you, only the conceptualist would agree to that.
Ah, okay. Only a conceptualist would agree. Only a conceptualist would agree that logic is a process of the mind.
Well, only the conceptualist agrees that fundamentally it's a process of the mind. Obviously, you can think about logic. I can think about anything. I can think about American football. Doesn't mean American football is, by its nature, conceptual, right? But the conceptualist says logic is, by its nature, conceptual. It's,
all abstractions are conceptual.
So the Platonist says that there are abstract objects that are not conceptual, that they exist independently of the thinking. So
well, let's look at each one if we could, because Platonism, abstract objects, no spatio-temporal things like they're transcendentals, basically redness, justice, beauty, and it's just there.
Yeah.
I've always found that to be insufficient because I'm going to ask you this. I'm taking a major tangent here, and you're probably going to laugh. All transcendentals are abstractions. Is that true? Let me explain myself first so you know what I'm saying. Redness is an abstraction. It's a concept. It's an idea. Justice is duckness, hoarseness, things like that. And these things, this is just my own thinking. I've not read these philosophers on this stuff. And I've actually said I've wanted to talk to someone who's highly trained in this so I can ask them the questions. So this is a good opportunity for me. Because I see those things like justice, redness as being transcendent, in that they're not dependent on space and time for their truth. Well, redness really is. I mean, red apple, space and time there. But we have what's called an instance. I think it's called an instance of it, an instance of redness. But the nature and essence of redness is not in a single place and time. It transcends space and time as we recognize instances of it. So hence, for example, redness has a transcendent quality to it. But on the other hand, redness is something that's perceived in the mind only. Yeah. And so therefore, it's an abstraction. Therefore, this is pretty low base here, but this kind of thinking, I'm thinking, that there's the question, are all transcendentals abstractions?
So my jumping off point when you say the word abstractions is to just pin the word down first.
Okay,
so
let's do that.
I would say that so when you have like Google Maps, right, and you can put it in satellite mode and it shows you all the detail like you would see if you were looking at it through a camera or something, and then you can just put it in maps mode and all it shows you is the roads and with the junction numbers or whatever, right? You know what I'm talking about, yeah?
Say that again?
You've used the program Google Maps, presumably.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So there's you can switch either between satellite mode,
right,
and maps mode. Well, and maps mode just shows you where the roads are and what number the road is or whatever. Satellite mode shows you a picture of like the trees or each. Right. The maps mode is an abstract. It's abstracted away much of the detail that the satellite mode shows you. It's more abstract than the satellite mode is. It's still got most of the important detail, but it has less of it's only really got the relevant detail if you don't care about what trees there are there, and you only really care about where you're going, right?
Yeah,
so
in that sense, yeah.
So it's an abstraction from, and both of them are abstractions from the actual landscape, which has more detail.
Yeah, I mean abstraction a little bit differently than that, in that my thought, okay? So if I'm having a thought, whatever the thought is, T for thought, that, this is, Okay, these are some of the things. Okay, I'm just going to just tell you what's going on in my head sometimes when I think about these things. The nature of thought itself is really interesting. So why we get dualists in the world. I can understand why some philosophers are dualists, the physical realm and then thought. Because thought has existence, but it doesn't have any spatio existence, and it's not dependent upon, whatever. And so we have this, so some people, I thought when I first heard this, I thought that was ridiculous, but no, it's not ridiculous to hold to a dualistic position in this context. I understand that. Just like math, as you mentioned earlier, and I like the way you said it, and I forgot what you said, how you said it, but one of the ways of saying is, why does math impress itself upon matter?
Yeah. Okay,
two
yeah.
blocks.
Yeah.
And which I think is a really interesting discussion. What the heck is going on that you have mathematical values, which are abstractions, that have impressibility upon our physical realm? To me, that is a real great question. I'd love to discuss that with people.
There's a really great paper by Eugene Wigner, who was one of the people who started quantum mechanics on the, I can't remember the title of the paper exactly, but the mysterious applicability of mathematics to reality or something.
Yes, I'd love to read that.
Yeah, it's great. There's that's a mysterious thing, very similar to the mystery of why is it that the laws of logic hold.
Exactly. That's why I was backing up for the math thing, which I want. If you got the article or a link to that, I want to find it. I want to read that article because I've actually been wondering about that. The mysterious applicability of mathematics. Why the heck does math work?
I'll tell you what. I'll see if I can find it now.
Because I think it's a similar issue to the Transcendentals.
Yeah. The unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural realm. I think that's what it's called, in the natural science. There you go. I'll send the link. I'll put the link in the. There you go.
Okay, good. I'm going to definitely copy that down. And I hope it's okay to say the way I said it. Why does math impress itself upon matter? I like the way that just. I like the sound of that. But it's not technically correct, I know. But it does. It has this relationship. And I've been thinking about this. And I think the best explanation is God. I can't connect the dots yet. Here it is. Oh, look at that. Yes, this is going to be good. Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah. Reasonable
effectiveness of mathematics and the natural sciences. Okay, I'm looking forward to reading that. I got to take a plane trip this later week, so I'll read it. Okay. So Platonism, or were we? Abstractions. All transcendentals are abstractions.
No, I would say all the laws of logic, at least on this conception, are abstract objects. Now, an abstraction is different from an abstract object.
Define abstract object.
So an abstract object, I think it may be easier for you to row backwards from the concept of God to an abstract object. Just shave away the personal quality of God. So he's not a person. Think about God, but not being a person, right? So he's non-spatiotemporal. He has like properties or whatever, but he doesn't have any personality. He doesn't think. He doesn't feel whatever. Right? He's essentially an abstract object for a Platonist. So the number one exists very much like God does in Christian theology, as far as I understand. I'm not a theologian. Obviously, that's your area of expertise, but. So as far as I understand it, that Plato says there's this realm out there which never changes, that's eternal, that really is the true reality. And this one is a kind of fleeting, unreal, imperfect reality. And the true reality kind of bestows upon this reality various useful properties like being countable and being divisible into different categories like color and length and cause and whatever. But an abstract object doesn't require us to think about it. It would be there anyway, regardless of us. It's there before us. It's in a sense more real than we are, more real than this fleeting reality that we find ourselves in. So
that seems completely other than what we can experience, and therefore we can't really know that is an actuality or a truth, an abstract object that's not spatial temporal. The only thing we can experience like that is, so to speak, a thought. The thought takes process and time. So
the Platonist will say something like Plato himself said something about how you use reason, pure reason, to determine these things. So, I mean, not to get too far off into a tangent here, but so when you do geometry, high school geometry, and you determine that the internal angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees, you don't mean that the internal angles of a triangle that you draw on a piece of paper add up to 180 degrees, because strictly speaking, that's false, because the angles are going to be slightly out and the lines aren't going to be straight, whatever. What you mean when you say that that's true is you mean this ideal...
The conceptual, right.
Yeah, so you've attached yourself mentally to the ideal realm. So you have some...
A triangle...
But through pure rationality. So it's not an empirical access, it's a purely rational access. Now this idea in itself, the idea you can purely rationally dial up directly into the eternal realm, led to a lot of Christian theologians like Thomas Aquinas giving pure rational proofs for the existence of God, because he's mimicking on purpose the Platonistic idea of using reason, pure reason, to cut through the changing realm of the transient world and go directly to the eternal world.
But I think that if you assume abstract objects are true, then you could use the same thing and just say, well, just assume God is true. He'd be the eternal terminus, the eternal abstract object. That would make, in my opinion, Platonic norms actual. Because
the point then, though, is that why God? I mean, so if you're saying if you're going to assume abstract objects, you may as well assume God. But my rejoinder to that would be, well, if you're going to assume abstract objects, why assume God? I've already got abstract objects. I don't need God to do that job.
Okay, let me put you on speaker so that I can hear it. He got back in the room. Okay, say something.
Yeah, hello.
Okay, good. So, why assume God? Because that's a discussion. Because
if you're going to have abstract objects, you may as well just assume God. But that's not the right way to think about it. If you've already got abstract objects, what function would it play to also assume God as well? Like if there's the eternal realm...
Because he would provide the necessary preconditions for those abstract objects to exist.
They don't need any. They already are just assumed to exist.
But if you just say, then can't I just say, well, if you just assume that they exist, then I can assume God exists, is just as valid.
Yeah, you can assume that God exists, but the question is like the utility in assuming that. What does it do to say that?
But it makes sense to assume God. It's very utilitarian, because if he is the universal transcendent mind by which, I'm not using this the way you want me to use it, but abstract objects can have their existence and can be accounted for, then we have an explanation, and he becomes a terminus. I know that you're defining abstract objects as without having to have any need or cause. They just are. Yeah, exactly, but that's what I'm saying. Then God just is. So that argument doesn't help. Doesn't do anything.
But that's fine. Okay, so you've got your position where there are abstract. So now we're just for some reason battling out between two versions of Platonism. Like me, I don't know, the atheistic Platonist who just says, I've got all my law of non-contradiction over here, my numbers over there, my redness over here, right? Done. Everything I can, all the things I need to account for, the intelligibility of human experience, done. Everything's done. Now you say, I've got my Platonic realm, and I've got all the things that you've got, but I've also got God. Well, why then? What difference does it make? I've already got everything I need to account for everything.
No, but you can't account for it. Let me ask you a question, a test question. Let's say there was a red steel sphere, just painted red, whatever. It's just a red sphere. It doesn't matter its diameter, because there's going to be nothing else existing in the universe. Is the sphere red?
So say it again. There's a red sphere. Is the sphere red?
Yeah, we're going to make a red sphere. Here it is. We put it out there in space, and now the universe ceases to exist. There are no minds anywhere, any place, any time. There's just nothing. Is the sphere red?
It seems to me that it's part of the setup of the example that the sphere is red. You said it's a red.
I would say no, it was not red, because red is a perception.
But you just said it's a red sphere.
But I said before we put it in the universe, because redness requires a mind to perceive. That's the point. That if it's the only thing that exists out there, how do we know that it's red? There is no knowledge of it. I know I defined it as that being there, but the definition itself requires a mind. Because we have to say, look, there it is. And it requires eyeballs. Like my friend here, his wife is blind. She can't see redness. Well, there is no redness to her. It doesn't have any existence to her. If everybody,
if you're a Platonist, then redness exists as an abstract object, independently of whether anyone thinks about it.
Okay, so then I could reduce. Am I correct? Sorry.
Let me just say this then. Look, so in your example, if I was a Platonist and you said to me, look, there's a red object, but nobody's there to perceive whether or not it's red. So this is like if a tree falls down and there's no one to hear it, does it make a noise? That's the sort of appeal you're making, because you're saying redness.
Yeah, because sound occurs in the brain.
Well, but you're saying redness only occurs in the mind, right? But not for a Platonist. Not so for a Platonist, right? Redness is an abstract object. It exists in the eternal realm. So he says,
I think
why not? That's not a problem for a Platonist.
I would say that it is a problem, but I don't want to argue about that. But I think it is a problem because I just see redness as a perception. If there's no light in the room, there's no redness.
But where are you coming from on that? I mean, if you're asking what a Platonist would say, then he just disagrees with you about that. I mean,
no, that's actually scientific. Things don't have color.
Yeah, because if we put a red ball in a room, we turn the lights out, and there's no light there. There is no redness.
I don't think that you maybe. I mean, it's fair enough if you've never heard about any of these positions before.
Yes, I have.
Well, okay, fine. Well, in that case, then you shouldn't be thinking that that's an objection to Platonism, because it's not.
Yeah, I understand what Platonists would do. They would say it's irrelevant whether or not the red quality is there by the nature of light's reflectivity. There is a concept, or I'll use the word concept very loosely right now. There's an abstraction that exists eternally by itself in another realm, and that's how it's been. And we simply come, so to speak, come in contact with it through our mind, so to speak. That's Platonism, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand, and I think it has problems, but nevertheless, we should get back to the. What's that?
It does have problems, but this isn't one of those problems.
I think it is, but
okay.
I'd love to sit and talk with you more about all these things. Seriously, I'm particularly interested in why numbers impress themselves upon our natural realm. Anyway, I'll get to that another time.
Okay, so look, let's if you don't mind, let's bring the argument back to your argument.
Yes.
I think that we had gone over sufficiently why, if you have a disjunctive syllogism where the first premise is P or not P, then, I mean, maybe you didn't accept me saying it at the time, but what happens is, either way that you run the argument, you have to have the second premise is equivalent to the conclusion.
Yeah, I understand, but I don't think it's a valid assertion. I don't think the process is right.
Which process?
Because when we get back to this, it's an illustration for 1 and 2. The ball is the cause of the house burning down. The ball is not, the ball is not the cause of the house burning down. We have two statements, and we know that number 2 is the correct statement, and so we know that it's not, the ball is not the cause. There's another cause, because this necessitates another cause. But if we were to say, as you're doing it, let me see. So I'm going to do it this way. I'm risking a lot here. We have B, or we have not B. Dang it, right?
Yeah.
And then you're saying, so then it's not B, which is B, and then but not B is equivalent to B, so it doesn't work.
So, well, but why doesn't it work though?
Because it's becoming
right there.
Because it's tautologous. Because the negator becomes a positive, which is the first premise. You understand?
Right. So the conclusion is the same as the second premise.
Right.
That's it. Right. And if you have an argument where the conclusion is already one of the premises, then it's trivial.
I think there's a problem, and I can't articulate. I can see it in my head, but it's like this: B or not B. I didn't put my punctuation in there. B or not B, and it is. You say We say, but it's not B.
Mhm.
But that's what I think the word not is changing its meaning. I think there's equivocation in here, or I'm suspecting.
Well, I mean, in logic itself, right? Just forgetting. I mean, if
Yeah.
when I was teaching logic, if a undergraduate came to me with an essay and they'd said, look, whatever, blah blah blah, it doesn't matter whether they took a philosophy of mind, philosophy of ethics, whatever it was, right? If it turned out that the argument boiled down to P or not P, not P, therefore P, I'd say, well, hold on a minute. Second premise, not P. That just means P. So you've got already your conclusion as a second premise. Therefore, you're begging the question. That just means the argument's trivial. It's not that it's invalid, right? It's just that it doesn't actually substantiate into an argument.
But yeah, that's where I have the problem, because let me see if I articulate what's happening here. We have B or not B, and it is true that not B. That's how I'm seeing it.
Yeah,
but I understand what you're doing. You're saying, see, I'm saying it's true that it's not B, but you're saying it's not B. And
no, there's two ways you can do the argument.
What?
So if I said to you, look, I'm either drinking whiskey or vodka, right? Now, disjunctive syllogism doesn't care whether you negate the first option. So the second premise is always negating one of the two options, and the conclusion is the other option, whichever option you didn't use in the second premise. So
vodka or whiskey is not a true dichotomy.
Doesn't matter, though. Disjunctive syllogism doesn't need a true dichotomy. It just needs a true or statement. So
Gotcha.
Who cares if it's not a true dichotomy, right? Let's say for some reason I only ever drink whiskey or vodka or something, right? And you see me drinking something, you don't know what it is.
Those are the only two possibilities.
Well, let's say yeah, right. Who cares? So it's not a logical dichotomy, but you just know that it is true that either I'm drinking whiskey or I'm drinking vodka, right? And then somehow I say, well, I'm not drinking whiskey, right? Then you know that I'm not drinking. Then I must be drinking vodka, right? It must be the other option. If I've negated one of the options, it must be the other. Now, I know that you understand this concept because I've heard you say it loads of times. You get it. You've got two options, you negate one of them, then it must be the other one. But the point is, it doesn't matter which one you negate. Just the rule is just negate one of them and you conclude the other. Right? So now let's just take that understanding of how disjunctive syllogism works and now think about if the first premise is P or not P. Now let's just take, so obviously there's two ways we could do it. We're going to negate one of them, or we're going to negate the second one, the first one or the second.
Yeah.
Right. So
let's. What you're saying. Let me think.
Let's do the first way. Let's negate the first option. Right?
You're negating either one, but you're negating. You're making invalid. You're making not true the other one. But not true is not the same thing as absence of. That's where I see the problem is. I think there's an equivocation going on. You're saying it. I just said it. What did I say? I just said it the way I thought. I forgot what I said.
You're saying that negation and absence of aren't the same thing. Okay, fine,
right.
Fair enough. But now what you're doing is you're referring back to the previous version of the argument where I said it's false dichotomy. So I say either it's false dichotomy when you say God can account for the transcendental laws of logic or not God can account for the transcendental laws of logic. I say, hold on a minute, false dichotomy. Neither of those two options is true. Right? And then, so reconstruction, let's make it so that it's a dichotomy. Either God can account for the transcendental laws of logic, or it's not the case that God can account for the transcendental.
No problem.
P or not P.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about now. So if it's P or not P, let's pick one of those two options and negate it as our second premise. So let's just run through this. There's only two ways, right? It'll only take a second. Let's say we negate P as our second premise. Right? So the first premise, P or not P, second premise, not P, then the conclusion has to be the other option. But the other option is not P, because we started off with either P or not P.
You just lost me.
We've got P or not P, second premise, not P, conclusion, not P. Right? Now, obviously the second premise is the conclusion. So then that's true.
I understand. Right? It's a substitution.
The only way
something's not right. Something's just not right.
I mean, this is like checkmate. It is right, unfortunately. I mean, I understand that it's because I'm speaking it that it doesn't sink in. But trust me, I mean, this isn't like very complicated, and it's just
I understand.
It's logically provable that this is trivial. And
I understand.
Take my word for it right now.
I understand, but there's something wrong with it, and I can't put my finger on it yet.
Well, let me say this: there's not something wrong with the following. A disjunctive syllogism with a dichotomy, a logical dichotomy as the first premise, is trivial. There's nothing wrong with that, and I can logically prove that. And that might have to sink in, but like that's game over. That's checkmate for that. You can't say, well, maybe the only way you could do that is if you say, well, I'm not using classical logic. I mean, I know how classical logic works. I can literally prove it to you how it works.
Okay.
In the strongest sense of proof, because a logical proof is really the only true sense of proving anything.
But it assumes certain things to begin with.
Classical logic, but then you were assuming that in the first place.
Yeah, but can you look at what I just put in there? Is that true, what I just said?
But that's not the form of disjunctive. So you've said be or not be, and it's true that not be, therefore be. So what you've done in that argument is you've said either the first option or the second option. When it's not the first option, therefore it is the first option.
No, this one said. No, what I'm saying is, let me clarify because maybe I didn't write it right. It's either the first option or the second option. And what? Oh, it's gonna be.
Yeah, I don't think you wrote it
first.
Right,
yeah, I didn't. It's either the first option or it's.
So I think what you meant is be or not be.
Right.
And it is true
that it's not be.
That it's not be. Therefore
it has
it's not
to be
be, though.
Yeah. Then the only conclusion you could make then is that it's not be, and that's fair enough. But that just means that your second premise is it's true that it's not be. Therefore, it's not be.
But if not be.
Okay, I'm not writing it right then.
Yeah. Okay. So do it the other way around. If the second premise, it's true that not be, therefore be.
That's correct.
That's right. But then the problem with that is that two nots cancel out. They mean the same thing. So it's equivalent to just saying be, therefore be, because not be is the same as be. Right?
Well,
if atheism is false, that means that
you were saying we could take either side of it, either the be or not be. If we falsify either side, the other is true.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
So saying if not be is false,
that's like
then
not
be is true.
Yeah, so that's like saying if not be is true, then be is true.
That's what does it to me. That's where the problem comes in. It's a double negation. So I put it in here.
It's not a double negation if you're saying, instead of saying not be, I think like if what you originally wrote, be or not be, and it is false that not be.
No, I'm saying not be is
it's false that not be is just saying
Look,
not be, and that's just the same as saying be.
Okay, we're not.
Three things are all equivalent to each other.
Okay. See, I put it in there. The ball is the cause of the house burning down. The other option, the ball is not the cause of the house burning down. So we have be, we have not be.
Mm-hmm.
But number two is true. The ball is not the cause of the house burning down.
Right, so now you're not using disjunctive syllogism, because in a disjunctive syllogism you have two options, and then you negate one of them.
Before we get to that, is this not correct, what I'm saying here?
Yes, but now what you're doing is equivalent to me saying, look, I'm either drinking vodka or whiskey. I am drinking vodka.
No, it's not. Because ball is in the same sentence. It's not saying the ball is the cause of the, and then the second one, the turkey is not the cause of the house burning down.
Okay, look, it's what you're saying now is equivalent to me saying either I'm drinking whiskey or I'm not drinking whiskey.
Correct.
And then you're saying, look, you're not drinking whiskey. Okay, but what's the conclusion?
No, it's either true. It's either true that you're drinking whiskey, or it's not true that you're drinking whiskey.
Right. Right. First, so that's the first premise. Now, what do you want your second premise to be?
Oh, you say that the or is the entire makes the whole thing the first sentence.
Yes. You've got two options, either this option or that option. Second premise. It's not the first option. Conclusion, it's the second option.
Okay, I got you.
That's disjunctive syllogism. So look, let me write it for you.
No, I got you. It's because of the word or, and it's included in the first sentence. So when I say it's either this or that, you're saying it's a first sentence. But I'm trying to break it down, like I do here, 1, 2, and 3. This is what I'm doing here, 1, 2, and 3. That's how I'm thinking it.
Right.
So what's the right way to write that?
Okay, let me write it. Right. 1. if we want to do be or not be, 2, not be, and then 3, not be. Right, so let me just go through that. On 1, right,
It still didn't make sense to me. Because you,
let me just run through.
you said
I've
2 and...
for you now as quick as
Well,
clearly
let me look at it.
stated. Right, the first premise.
Be or not be, not be, be.
No. That's not what I wrote. Is it? I wrote be or not be. Sorry,
Yeah.
I put the dash in between.
Yeah, I saw you. Yeah.
Be or not be. First premise. So you've got 2 options. So
Wait. No, please write it out correctly because you have a dash in there.
Yeah, I put the dash in the wrong place. Look.
I know, but
Okay, but not everyone can read it. So it says be
let him do it
or
first.
not be. That's the first premise.
No. See, no.
His second
You
premise.
said, no, Alex, this is what's confusing me. What I've seen you say is be or not be.
Right. Okay. So look, let me just do this. Like, there's 2 ways of doing it.
That's not what I'm saying. It's be or not be.
Here's what you're saying. Okay. So now the second way of doing it, right? It's the same premise. This is terrible listening for anyone on a podcast. I apologize.
Yeah, on the Bible Wingnut podcast, so you get this. Nowhere else.
I listen on the podcast. I'm a podcast listener myself, so I apologize to anyone.
Wait, you don't stay up late just to watch this live?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I see. This is the problem. I see what you're doing, and it doesn't make any sense.
Right, I've written it both ways. There's only 2 ways you can do it.
No.
Why don't you hold on, Alex? Why don't you read those out for folks, please?
Okay, so option 1, and okay. So option 1, it says be or not be. Right, these are the 2 options: God or not.
That's not what it says. Sorry, go ahead and read it. That's not what it says, but go ahead.
Okay, premise 1 says be or not be. Right, that is what it says, isn't it?
Okay, I think I see what. Okay, so Matt, he's saying not dash be to mean not be.
Yeah, I'm writing not.
Yeah, but don't read the dash as a negative.
The dash be. You've been saying dash is the negator.
Yeah.
So you mean
that's the confusion here.
Be or not be. That is the question.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Let's just.
But by the way, Matt, you just caught on to what's been going on in the Mixler chat because they've been making that joke for a while.
Okay.
Right.
But when way you're saying it is be or it should be this way. But you're saying. Let me follow this.
So let's say be or not be.
That's it.
First premise, right? That's the first premise. Now there's 2 ways we can go, and those 2 ways we can go are: do we negate the first option, B?
Wait.
Second option,
sorry.
not.
It's starting to dawn on me. Some things are starting to dawn on me. Sorry. See what I wrote in there? I'm not trying to control this or trap you or anything like that. I'm just trying to understand. In all seriousness, see where it says B and then or and then the hyphen B. That's the right way to say be or not be, right?
Either way, it doesn't. Yeah, the symbolism, as long as it conveys the right idea, doesn't matter which way you write it.
Okay. Now, is it not correct to say be? To say not? What I was understanding. That's be or not be.
No, that just says be or not be.
Because then in this one, the hyphen doesn't mean not.
No.
No or yes. That's correct or I'm not correct?
The hyphen doesn't mean not if the word not is on there.
Oh, when you have the word not, you don't need don't have to say double not dash thing.
The hyphen just means that it's linked to the next thing. Like if you say I'm unnatural and you write un-natural.
I got you.
Un-natural.
Yeah,
I got you.
That's where Matt was getting confused.
Okay, but now we've gone
on him in the chat to tell him he should use the more proper, as he's a programmer, he should use the proper programming language of or and bang. But yeah, the confusion being is that Matt was reading that as not be.
Right.
Because he saw the
what was
dash
confusing the crap out of me.
To the B.
So now we can
that we can get back to about 15 minutes ago.
So it was like late night, slightly drunken logic class. Let's do this, right? I want to finish this. I want to make sure that this is clear to everybody right? First, disjunctive syllogism is very straightforward. It says if you've got two options and you know that one of those options is not the case, then you know that the other option is the case, right? Everybody understands it intuitively. It's very straightforward. You understand it, Matt. I think Andrew, Tim, anyone listening must understand that. I'm either drinking whiskey or vodka. It's not vodka, therefore it's whiskey, right? That's a very easy argument form.
I saw you drink water.
Yeah, okay, but
Fallacy of the excluded middle.
You know what I mean, right? And so
yes.
I'm just saying, if it's P or not P, B or not B, whatever, if you've got one option and the negation of that option, right, you do the same thing. You say, well, look, if it's not the first option, if it's not B, then you conclude the second option. The second option is not B. So if your second premise is not B, you have to conclude the other option, which was not B, and that makes it trivial, because you're just saying not B, therefore not B. But then if you
Right,
the
I
other,
see what you're saying. Right, I've wrote it out. Is that correct? So now I'm understanding it? Did a little bit looser than you did, but...
You have three premises. I don't understand.
I just write it. I'm not doing it, just a simple syllogism.
B, yeah, okay, I see what you mean. B or not B equals B. Okay, fine. Yeah, right. Double negation, elimination. And now you've got, what's for, B or B? It just means, okay, so I see what you're saying, right? In a sense, that's right. That's right. It's
not written properly, but you just trying to convey the logic. So I'm understanding what you're saying there. That's what was confusing the bejeebers out of me. The not hyphen B was like, it doesn't make any sense.
Let's just cut through the chase.
Now I got it. Now I got it.
Like nots and ors and whatever. People listening probably don't know what the hell we're talking about, right? Let's just cut to the chase. All I'm saying, and this is very easy, you don't want to argue. Nobody, regardless of what premise they're arguing from and what conclusion they're arguing to, nobody wants to argue using disjunctive syllogism and having the first premise as, something and its direct negation. And I hope that maybe you can see that either way you go, you are going to end up with the second premise being the conclusion. Now that's just game over for that. I'd rather talk, because it's just straightforward, and I think that really you probably benefit from not having me say these words not P and not P over and over again, because it probably won't be the best way of getting the penny dropping. Probably be easier just to look at my article or whatever, I don't know. But seeing it written down is easier. Now what I want to do is, because that, as far as I'm concerned, that's been established. It's not, I'm not saying anything about God, I'm not making a theological point here. I'm making a logical point. And it's not a complicated logical point. It's a very, it's a rudimentary part of logic. It's not questionable. It's like, if you've got a king and he can't move anywhere, is it checkmate? It is checkmate. That's just sort of by definition it's done. So I'd rather look at the first way that you phrased the argument before, which was, if you've got God, or either God accounts for the laws of logic or not God accounts for the laws of logic. And the reason that that's a false dichotomy is because, well, you can't use the fact that God exists, or it's not the case that God exists. It's nothing to do with it, right? In fact, it's a bad thing. The last thing you want to do is go to the logical dichotomy of God exists or not the case that God exists, because as I just spent 15, 20 minutes trying to go through, that leads to the argument boiling down to P, therefore P. So the last place you want to go
Alex,
is the logical dichotomy.
I'm curious, Hassan.
I understand what you're saying. I'm going to think that through, though.
Do you think that Matt's argument itself, understanding how he's meaning it, do you think that is flawed, or is it just the way he's wording it?
That's a good question. Because I'm not convinced that okay, so I am convinced that the way he's wording it is flawed.
Yeah, and that's what I've been hearing you say, and that's why I wanted to bring that up. It sounds like you're arguing over and what might be interesting is if you gave Matt a more correct way logically to.
Well, if I had a correct transcendental argument, I would believe that God existed. Right?
You do? No.
Yeah. I would not be in self-deception about the fact that God existed, right? So I'm not in that state. I don't know if there's a correct way of doing the transcendental argument for the existence of God. I don't know. I've never really seen.
Well, I'm saying as far as the wording of it, because that's what you've been spending a lot of time going over the wording.
Yeah, well, that's what logic is about.
Yeah, yeah. So the issue really being is there, what would be the proper way to make this I can't speak, to make the argument?
Well, my point is that either it's begging the question, as we've just gone through then, or it's a false dichotomy. I don't know if there's a right way of doing it. I'm not here to give you the right way of arguing for the transcendental argument. Sorry, if that's what you wanted me to do.
No. What I'm saying, so the wording of it, would it be better to say it that, because like we had said, it would be logical to say the Christian God exists or the Christian God does not exist.
Yeah, that would be logical, but then you end up in trivial. You don't really have an argument if you start there.
Okay.
But if you do have an argument, if you start off with either God accounts for the laws of logic or not God accounts for the laws of logic.
Well, but would it?
It's a false starting point.
Why is it a false
Would it be
dichotomy?
more accurate to say either God? Hold on, for the phrasing of it, would it be more accurate to say either God is or is not the cause of the laws of logic?
But then that leads to trivial again. It leads to the same problem that the second premise will be the negation of the second premise.
Well, if you negate one of those, either one.
If you negate either one of them, it will end up being that the second premise is the conclusion, and it will be begging the question. So
yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Really, it means that you've got to go back to the drawing board here with this argument, because what helpful suggestions? That's what you're saying. My helpful suggestion is abandon ever saying dichotomy and disjunctive syllogism is my way of arguing for God's existence. Abandon that. That's done. It's not even a sinking ship. It's a sunk ship. It's done, right? Then what you want to do is how do I make this argument? Well, what you have to do is much messier, and it's not really logical. It's conceptual. It's philosophical. You're going to have to say something like, in addition to those Platonistic, linguistic, conceptual, and Aristotelian options, for some reason, you actually have to have God, and none of those other options work. So it's a philosophical argument. It's not a logical argument. But I suppose that's the way of putting it.
No, I understand what you're doing. I got it. I'm following you.
Just forget disjunctive syllogism, forget logical dichotomy. Then they're not going to help you. That's my point, I suppose. If anything, if you remember anything
I understand what you're
saying to you now, that.
I got it. I understand.
Does that answer your question, Andrew?
Yeah. I mean, it seemed that
I understand.
You spent a large amount of time, not saying it was wasted time, because I think some of this, and for those who may be listening, watching, one of the things that we are seeing here is, you have people at different levels trying to understand one another, and this just is something we have to learn to do, is learn to talk the same language, and sometimes that takes time. It takes patience. For those who are watching, you've seen both Alex and Matt take the time to try to understand one another. You saw no name calling. It's been almost 2 hours.
I called him
not
British.
a single one of them called each other names.
Yep.
Alex is done with his whiskey, so now he's got to move to his vodka. And but this is what we have to do. And so I think a lot of it though was where you were focusing in on was the way he was phrasing it, and Matt was focusing on what he was thinking, and so there's that disconnect.
That is a crucial lesson to learn, I suppose, in the sense that logic isn't about the content of what you're saying. It's only about the form of what you're saying. It doesn't so that's why I'm always trying to say, look, forget about God or not God, whatever. Just think about it as P or not P, because arguments are valid if the form of the argument is valid. It's not valid if the content of the argument makes it valid. In fact, that's really the essence of the fallacy of special pleading, is if you say, well, it wouldn't be valid, but I'm talking about subject matter X, and that makes it valid. Right? The whole point of that, the reason why that's a fallacy is that logic doesn't care about content. It only cares about form. So look, if I say to you, all A's are B, all B's are C, therefore all A's are C. That doesn't matter whether I'm talking about You know, it doesn't matter what A and B and C refer to, as long as you understand the logical relations between them. It's about
Well, that's for validity, though. But
yeah, that's true.
we still have whether it's true, and therefore content does matter.
But truth isn't logical. I mean,
No. What I'm saying is we can have a logically valid statement that's not true.
yes, but my point was that if what you're talking about is logic, then all that matters is whether the argument is valid or not. And when you're talking about that, all that matters is whether the form is valid. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. It matters
Well,
how
it does matter whether your premise is true, correct?
not for whether it's valid.
No, not for. I agree. Not for validity.
Right, so all that
Not for validity.
logic cares about is whether it's valid. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's true. I don't care whether it's not the case that all A's are B. Maybe it's false that all A's are B. I'm just saying if it is true, then blah, blah, blah. I keep going from there. I'm just saying, the form of the argument carries it forwards, not the content. And that's really, that's what, if you want to think logically, that's what you have to do. You have to abstract, to use Matt's favorite phrase, abstract from the content. Just think about the form.
So if I say if the ground is wet, it rained. The ground is wet, therefore it rained. That's logically valid, but it falls into a fallacy of the excluded middle because the sprinklers could have gone off.
Sorry, can you say it again?
Okay, so if the statement is, if the ground is wet, then it rained. The ground is wet, therefore it rained.
Well, that's illogical. It's invalid because it's what you're doing is affirming the consequent.
Right.
So
it falls into a fallacy of the excluded middle because there's other arguments for it.
No. Well, I mean, it sounds like it falls into. I can see why you're going there, but it's not. That's not why it goes there. It's because what you have to do is understand the truth conditions. What makes for a conditional statement.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Truth does play into this.
Of the conditions do, because that defines what makes that. It's like when we say, look, it's conditional is the hardest one, and I appreciate that. I mean, I know that Matt and all of you guys intuitively understand logical arguments, right? You're clever guys, right? I don't diminish anything about your intelligence at all.
Wait. Did you include Tim on that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. But my point is that, like, if you haven't literally looked in detail at the logic of it, the hardest one is conditional, and affirming the consequent is a fallacy that involves a conditional. But let's just, for instance, to make it easier, the easiest one is conjunction. So that's an and statement, right? The truth conditions of an and statement. If I say A and B, right? Everybody understands that A and B is only true when both A is true and B is true. Right? Obviously, if either of them is false, then the sentence A and B is also false. If I'm drinking vodka and whiskey, then if it's not the case that I'm drinking whiskey, then it's not true that I'm drinking vodka and whiskey.
Well,
right?
Okay, so to take the example I gave, right?
Yeah.
If the ground is wet.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember how I worded it. If the ground is wet,
then it rained.
Right.
And the ground is wet, therefore it rained.
Sorry. Okay. So if the ground is wet, then it rained. Surely you mean if it rained, then the ground is wet. That would be the normal causal chain, right?
If the ground is wet, it rained.
Oh, okay. So no. Okay. So I've made a mistake then. In that case, if that's the way that you phrased it initially, I beg your pardon in that case, because then what you said is correct.
Well, it's better than begging the question.
Yeah, that's true. What you've done is then, because so you're saying if A then B, A therefore B. Absolutely, utterly true. Yeah, that's called Modus Ponens, and that's the cornerstone of almost everybody considers that to be as rationally intuitive as the idea that P or not P, or not the case that P and not P, or any of the other laws of logic. Really, strictly speaking, that is the law of logic, because you're talking about inference. So you've got a two-premise argument. First premise A, or if A then B. Second premise A, conclusion B. Right, that's utterly valid. And as I said right at the beginning of this, logic is the science of valid inference. You're inferring the conclusion from the premises, and that's logic.
But with that,
talking about sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Please do say what you're going to say in a second. Let me just finish what I was going to say, because I'm halfway through. When Matt talks about the principles of logic, and he's saying the law of identity, the law of excluded middle, and the law of non-contradiction, really, strictly speaking, they're not laws of logic. What we're talking about here is maybe axioms of logic or principles of metaphysics. Because logic, strictly speaking, is about inference. And what we're talking about here is you're just saying, look, it's true, it's a tautology, it's true in every case, regardless of the content, that P or not P. That's not an inference, it's a starting point. It's an axiom. It's like saying parallel lines will never meet, or whatever. Right? It's not a conclusion. It's just a starting point. So,
okay.
That's not, but I may be splitting hairs. And anyway, I'm sorry, Tim. I guess we're probably pushing the boundaries of the.
As the host, let me take control here a little bit. Alex, how much time do you have?
Well, I'm still awake, so.
Because
what time is it there? Out of curiosity.
2:52.
Because Alex, you just mentioned axioms, and I was wondering if you would be willing to engage with someone who takes a little bit different approach, actually a very much different approach to this idea of God and logic, and his focus is on axioms instead of a transcendental argument. I think I'm articulating that correct.
Does that mean that he's Clarkian rather than Van Tillian?
Absolutely. Jason Peterson, I wanna give you an opportunity to talk to Alex about how you go about speaking in concepts of God and logic. Is he there?
I think he's fallen asleep.
Well, I just talked to him on Facebook less than a minute ago.
Well, maybe we got. I think he's been posting in Mixler. Hey, Jason, pay attention to this group chat.
Yeah, he's probably in delay. He's probably listening to Mixler, not here. This will be interesting if it ever happens.
And it was really interesting because just as you mentioned the word axiom, I saw that going on in the Mixler chat. So
I can see that he's muted from my point of view.
No, we can't hear you, Jason.
Yeah, he's muted.
Yeah, well, he did unmute for a bit. I will. I can't see.
He's saying, "Can anyone hear me?" in the chat. Now he's unmuted.
Okay, you're unmuted now. We heard you earlier, but he did have to get out and come back in. I hope that. Oh, and he just dropped out, so he may be trying to get back in now. That doesn't mean anyone should try to jump in. Hopefully the delay in Mixler will be long enough.
Anybody who jumps in will be quickly removed.
So Alex, while we wait for him to come in, at least I'm sure Tim will do this as well. But I appreciate your time coming in. I'm sure Matt does as well. Mm-hmm. It's good to have, even though we may disagree on some conclusions we have. It's good for, I think, a lot of people on both sides to see it and hear a discussion like this, where you and Matt and you and I would disagree on some conclusions, but it's some good learning on both sides, good trying to really try to understand one another's view and what one another's saying and take the time and something like that.
I'd like to take a moment to just second that.
To what?
Second that.
Oh.
I agree completely with what Andrew just said there.
Well, I'm going to say.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we can argue. We can disagree agreeably. What I was going to say is, I understand what you're saying. The issue is, it's aside from whether the ultimate argument is convincing or not, you're concerned about the delivery method. Basically, it seems to be what it is. Yeah, the delivery method, because I'm not trained properly in this, you're saying, aside from the argument, you're not delivering it properly. Let's get the delivery down, and then we could maybe, yeah, that's what you're getting.
My role as an analytic philosopher, which is what I am, as like a lawyer, and it's not like I'm saying that you're guilty, but I am saying that your defense at this point wouldn't establish that you're
right.
Or maybe the other way around, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, you know, the arguments, if you were to present them in court right now, wouldn't convince a jury because of this, that, and the other. So, you know,
you wouldn't convince the abstract logicians who hold to it. I know there's different views, different kinds of logicians and stuff like that in philosophy, and you're an abstract one.
Well, I'm an analytic philosopher. That means that those people who, how do I define it? So, one thing I have a particular interest in, and for a couple of years I've been editing a book which is supposed to come out maybe the end of this year, but on the history of logic. So I have a particular interest in this area. But what analytic philosophy is kind of the product of a revolution, the third big revolution in the history of logic that happened. So the first one was with Aristotle, and another guy was a Stoic called Chrysippus. Maybe you know him for other reasons in theology or something, but yeah, presumably you're aware of the Stoics, Matt, as a kind of the Stoics, right? As a school of Greek philosophy. There's like four schools of Greek philosophy.
At least I am.
Yeah, I'm sure it's common, but Chrysippus is like a sort of lost figure who wrote loads of stuff. We hardly have anything, almost nothing of what he wrote, but we have lots of people talking about what he wrote. He was this amazing dude. Anyway, there was this big boom of logic that happened around sort of 350, 400 BC. Then some reason it died off. Then there was this medieval period where there were people like Thomas Aquinas, William of Ockham. All of these guys are Christian, all of them using logic to better understand points of theology. And they make loads of new innovations. And then for some reason that dies off around the end of 1350, somewhere around that point. It's sort of something about people don't like deductive arguments and they prefer inductive arguments with like science or whatever comes in and makes it all seem unfashionable. And then really logic kicks in again at about 1850, and you get people like Boole and Frege and Peano and Russell, and logic kicks in again. And now we're really living in this third golden age of logic, which is like by far and away the most profound one. And what I'm a product of is like standing on the shoulders of like all these hundreds of people who. Let me just say this as well. Like, I'm not a big cheese in logic or anything. I know loads of people who would absolutely destroy me if I tried to present controversial logical arguments or whatever. But we just are in this golden age of logic, and analytic philosophy is a product of that. We're just really, really good at pinning down logical problems, spelling things out with ultra precision, and getting to the bottom of how arguments work and how they don't work. That's all analytic philosophy is. It doesn't really argue for anything in particular. It just argues with clarity about whatever the subject matter is. Does that make sense? I've just gone on a kind of random tangent. I mean, maybe that's useful for the break.
And it looks like Jason's joined us back. Jason, is your microphone working now?
I'm going to put you on my headset. Our company's leaving pretty quickly. I'll be listening, just so you guys know.
Oh, no, Matt, please turn your headset off so we could talk about you. It's much more fun. Oh, Jason got out again. Jason's clearly having some difficulties. Dude, that cup of whiskey is like and you may not get this reference, but it's like the widow's oil. that just kept refilling. I don't know. I keep seeing you drinking that, and never. Someone off camera must be refilling it for you.
I wish. I have the very last bit of a bottle of single malt.
How's it going? Getting ready to head out?
So,
Matt, you want to turn your microphone off?
Yeah, I'll mute him. So I was going to joke with you earlier while we wait for Jason to see if we could hear him again, but behind you, you could argue that that's Morse code. We got to figure out what that would be in Morse code or Braille.
It's actually a message that secretly disarms your worldview, which is why I think so much to Can I just ask a question and maybe a point of common ground? What do you think of the film God's Not Dead?
Oh, good Lord.
I would I don't like the arguments that they tried to give in that film. I thought there were some. I understand what they were trying to do, and to a Christian audience, it probably plays well, but that wasn't actually who their audience that they wanted to try to reach. And I didn't think their argument was. I don't think their argument would be very persuasive to a non-believer.
Good.
That's my theory.
I just wanted to make sure that we had common ground on the idea that, like, at the end they trapped the atheist professor guy, who's like the weakest proponent of atheism I've ever seen, by going, "How can you hate that which you don't believe in?" And he goes, "No, maybe I do believe it." Well, I hope you can all agree that's a terrible, terrible idea.
Well, and I know you say that, but I'll say this: I know that I deal with on a regular basis that professor type on our Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Yeah, maybe.
And so I understand your argument, but there, just to be honest, I mean, there's a difference between the thinking professing atheist and the non-thinking professing atheist, and a lot of guys just regurgitate, But
So
your mic, I think, was working because I think I heard you.
to wrap that up, Alex, Len watched that video. I didn't, and he went on record to say that there was horrible, horrible stereotypes of atheists in the movie. And,
Thank you.
So, all right, Jason, you should be able to talk. We heard you typing. We heard you responding to something that somebody said. Just a matter of you getting your...
Okay, sorry, I'm on my tablet, so I'm trying to figure this out. My computer just spazzed out as soon as I started talking. And I think it's really strange that Google's own browser works the worst on their own Hangout application.
All right, you're here now. That's the important part.
Yeah.
So you've got a totally different approach to this, which I think would be interesting. So go for it, Jason.
So the question was how I would account for the laws of logic and argue that God is the necessary precondition for intelligibility.
Okay.
That's what I'm supposed to be doing right now, right?
Yes. Yeah, that was, because we're talking about logic, have
Right.
been, and you had said that you go about this a totally different way.
Yes. All right, so let's define logic first. I define logic as a science of necessary inference. Do you agree with me on that, Alex?
Valid inference, yeah.
Well, that would be necessary inference. Because a necessary inference would have to be valid, correct?
Let's just say yeah, for the sake of moving
Okay.
on.
Well, just to be clear, if you have to draw a conclusion, if a conclusion must be the case if you state another proposition, then that is a necessary inference. So that's what I'm saying. But I'm just making sure, because if we don't have the same definition, we're not going to be able to dialogue.
Okay, so let's just be crystal clear about it. If an argument has premises and a conclusion, and if the argument has the properties such that whenever the premises are true, the conclusion is true, that means it's deductively valid. Now, the word necessary doesn't really do anything there. If it's valid, that just means that if the premises are true, the conclusion is true. So if we can agree on that, then fine.
No, I would disagree. Necessary is something. It's a word I need to use because even if you have a valid argument, it does not guarantee the truth of the premises themselves.
No, if you have a valid argument, what it says is if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Right, okay, then in which case we do agree. That's fine.
Okay, good. All right, so in regards to how I would approach it, as a Clarkian, I would start with the axiom of revelation. The axiom of revelation is the Bible alone is the Word of God written. From that, I can look at the propositions of Scripture, one of them being 1 John chapter 2, verse 21, that clearly says that no lie is of the truth, which would then, in that case,
Sorry. Says what? 1 John chapter 2, whatever it was, says what?
That no lie is of the truth.
That no lies are the truth.
Correct.
I disagree with that. That's false. I could lie. Lying means intentionally deceiving. So I could be of the opinion that I'm drinking whiskey and tell you that I'm drinking vodka, but I might be mistaken in thinking that I'm drinking whiskey, and it might be that I say the truth when I say that I'm drinking vodka, but I might be lying, because all that lying is saying other than what you think is the case. It doesn't mean, like, lying and saying the truth are not the same thing.
Would you mind if
lying and saying falsity are not the same thing.
Would you mind if I finish? I'm just explaining how I do it, and then if you want to pick at it, then you can. But I want to finish it first.
Sorry. I'll shut up. Sorry.
Thank you. All right. So again, I will start with the axiom of revelation, and from that axiom, the Bible alone is the Word of God written. I would say that I would say that we could look at the propositions of Scripture. One of them being 1 John chapter 2, verse 21. All right, which says no lies of the truth, which is certainly an affirmation of the law of contradiction. And we also can say that in any system of truth, the law of contradiction is necessary. Because if there is no distinction between propositions, then not only is communication impossible, but knowledge is also impossible. So, given that, I would say that the propositions of Scripture are a reflection of some aspect of some parts of the mind of God. God has chosen to reveal some propositions through Scripture to His believers, and because He has revealed them to us in this way, God thinks the law of contradiction is true. Now, since God is the sole causal force in the universe, the reason why the law of contradiction is the case is because God thinks it so. Acts 17:28, we live in Him, we live and move, and we have our being. God is the causal force in this universe. Whatever He thinks is true will be true. So, that being said, if God thinks the law of contradiction is true, that is a reason why it's true, and therefore God would be the necessary precondition for intelligibility. And that's really it. It doesn't prove that God exists. It doesn't prove that the Bible is the Word of God written, but it is an indirect argument that basically points to the idea that the proposition that knowledge is possible is compatible with what is already presented in the Scriptures. Now, you had an objection about 1 John 2:21.
Yeah, I had an objection to what you said. Did you say it again, so I'm getting it right?
About 1 John 2:21?
Yeah.
Yeah. No lie is of the truth.
Okay,
that's what I referred to.
I mean, maybe there's just I don't want to talk past you. I don't want us to talk past one another. So let's just be clear about it. I think that the definition of lying is to deliberately say what you think is not the case. And that means that lying isn't synonymous with saying something that's false. I could lie to you, think that something is not the case, but be wrong about it and accidentally say the truth whilst lying. You know, I'm trying to say something misleading and accidentally say the truth. So I just think that as a principle, all lies are false, is not, I wouldn't assent to that. So any argument that uses that as a premise, I would say was unsound.
Okay, let me get my Bible real quick. I actually don't have it with me. And I'll show you where you just went wrong.
I don't see this biblical issue. It's just a definition of what lying means. So,
well, you're defining your terms, but the question is, are you defining lying in the same way that the Bible defined it in that verse? So now we need to investigate that.
No. Hold on. Do you disagree with my definition of lying?
Well, when we talk about, I just put the 1 John 3:21, so that means that
what 1 John 3:21 says. I'm just saying, what does lying mean?
Well, you have to understand, and you're a PhD philosopher, right? So surely you understand that words can have more than one meaning, right? Because words
what you mean. Yeah. What do you?
But you need to understand, Alex, that I just appealed to Scripture. Did I not?
So do you appeal to Scripture for your definition for lying?
In this context, when I quote 1 John 2:21, I have to use the same definition that 1 John 2:21 uses.
Look, if all you're going to do is just say whatever the Bible says is true, then fair enough. I'm not going to. How can I argue with that? I'm just saying.
It's an I mean, you have to understand. I'm starting with an axiom here, and what you would do.
God exists. Just cut out all of the rest of it. Your axiom is God exists. Then we back to trivial. It's just okay. My starting point is God exists. My conclusion is God exists. Fine, I can't disagree. I mean, my disagreement is only that it's uninformative. I'm not persuaded by that. You mean?
Well, it doesn't matter whether you're persuaded or not.
Well, what's the purpose of the argument?
Well, let me explain. And also, I don't know if it's the feedback or not, but you're interrupting me a lot.
I'm sorry.
If you don't mind, just let me finish my thoughts before you say something. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere. And and if you do it for me, I'll definitely do it for you as well.
Let me say this to you guys, okay? Because Jason is on a tablet, it makes it harder. So you actually have to wait a little bit more between engagements. So,
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
That's all right. I mean, I don't know about this stuff. But I just want a dialogue. That's all.
Go for it.
Okay. So now we have to have a discussion about how it is that we argue for our respective positions. That's the question we need to ask. Because you just asked me. Could you repeat your question?
Well, I suppose what you mean is, my question was, do you take the definition of lying from the Bible, or do you have your own definition?
Well, first off, let's be clear. My words are symbols for communication of propositions. So when I refer to 1 John 2:21, and I say that no lie is of the truth, then when I refer to that verse and I communicate it to you, I communicate that proposition. The definition of lying that I invoke when I say that has to be the same one that is used in the Bible. So that's what I'm saying. So when we look at this, you could say, well, my definition of lying is different. But if there's no common definition, there is no room for dialogue. We can't have a meaningful dialogue. So we have to make sure when we talk about these things that we are using the same definitions. Otherwise, we're just going to talk past each other.
Okay, so let me now then, if you don't mind, let me just say a response to that. So it seems to me that we have a distinction between speaking falsely and speaking deceptively. And the reason that we have the distinction is because there's a difference between the two things. The difference is more or less what I said. I mean, deceiving means intentionally saying something that's different to what you think is the case, and speaking falsely is, regardless of intention, speaking otherwise than what is the case. Right? So there's at least a distinction there whether or not you want to call one of them lying or not. Right? The issue of definition is somewhat secondary to that. If you want to say that I define lying as synonymous with speaking falsely, then that's fine. But it just means now we don't have a word for or we have to use another word for deliberately saying otherwise than what we think is the case, which is okay. I mean, it just makes things slightly more cumbersome. It also makes the argument slightly less persuasive, though, on your part, because now all you're saying is when you say all lies are false, you're saying a tautology because it's true by definition that all lies are false. Because you're just saying to me, all I mean by lying is saying a falsehood. So, fine, I would accept that that's true, but I would only accept it's true on the basis that it's true by definition. It's not really informative. It's like me saying all triangles have 3 sides. Do you see my... I mean, I would like to stick to the normal rather than redefine the terms. I mean, my authority isn't the Bible, though, so maybe this is where we'll never agree.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think I accidentally interrupted you. I didn't know that. I thought you were done for a second. All right, so first, you haven't really given me an opportunity to explain where I'm coming from. Earlier I said that we have to appeal to the definition and what Scripture uses. And when I'm saying this, I have to communicate that to you. So that being said, I think it would be good to go ahead and turn to 1 John chapter 2 and go through and see in what way this word lie is being used. And then once we have a definition established, we can have a dialogue, hopefully. So, okay, so let's talk about this. In 1 John chapter 2, starting at verse 18.
Sorry. Forgive me, but can we... is there any way that we can do this without... I don't have a Bible in front of me. Is there any way that you could just cut to the chase and just tell me give me your argument in premise conclusion form? Is that possible?
Well, you have to understand. I mean, we have to start.
Give me the passage. We'll try to post it in their form.
Sure. First John chapter 2, verse 18 until let's go to 21. But you see, we can't just skip over stuff. That's not the proper way to do philosophy. We have to start from the beginning, and we have to proceed forward step by step.
Okay, so it's 1 John
chapter 2, starting at verse 18 up until verse 21.
All right, I'll post that in. Give me one moment, okay?
Take your time.
Because I can't open Logos on the same computer because, yeah, that just kills this computer.
I can just lay out the context because it's just the point I was getting at anyway. But what I was going to say is that in 1 John 2, starting at verse 18, there is a warning given concerning the coming of the Antichrist. And what is being told is actually the whole context is talking about truth. All right? So it says here, let's do verse 19. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have been continued with us. But they went out, that it might become plain that all are not of us. But you have been anointed by the Holy One, and you all have knowledge. I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and because no lie is of the truth. So in this context, with 1 John chapter 2, verse 21, with the context given, whenever it is referred to as a lie, it's talking about something that is told that is not true. So the notion of fallibility on the part of what you said, Alex, concerning, well, I could be saying something that I think is true, but it turned out to be a lie, does not apply here, because when we take the Bible as an axiom, all the propositions in the Bible are considered to be true and infallibly true. So the notion of fallibility is not applicable to the way I'm using the word in this instance.
Okay.
And for folks who are hearing the silence, Alex is reading what we posted in there.
That's fine.
Right. So I'm struggling to try and, in my head, see how, I mean, imagine you're in court and this is an argument that you're presenting to persuade a jury that's neutral. Or, even if they believe in the Bible, just boil it down to me. What's the cash value in what you just said? Where's the the beef and onions, or whatever expression.
What are you wanting?
So, I mean, I said that I see a distinction between deliberately saying something I think isn't true and speaking a falsehood. And that indicates that the equivalence between lying and speaking falsehood isn't the case. And what you're doing in response, I mean, I don't see that any of the previous text has anything to do with that point. It's just some other stuff that happens before.
Tell me what it means.
Well, because really all you're doing is saying, well, because I take the Bible as axiomatically true and everything in it is infallibly true, then therefore the definition of, or at least the sentence, I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and because no lie is of the truth. And really, just the last part of that, the subclause, no lie is of the truth. Really, because you hold as an axiom that everything in the Bible is true, it follows that no lies of the truth must be true, right? That means that you hold as axiomatically true that lying means semantically, whenever anyone says I'm lying, or if someone says to me, look, if I said to you, okay, let's go back to this, because I find natural language examples and intuitions that they give quite persuasive, and that's the business that I'm in to some extent, is that you say things like, well, you say to me, just making up an example off the top of my head, where's the money? I want to find the money. Where is it? You know where it is. Tell me where it is. And I know that the money is buried underneath the palm tree, but I say to you, for some reason, it's buried underneath the bike shed or something. I don't know. It doesn't matter, right? I tell you, I deliberately try and mislead you, right? But accidentally, someone without my knowing moved the money without me knowing and took it from underneath the palm tree and put it underneath the bike shed. So what I did was I tried to mislead you, but I accidentally told you the truth. Now, it seems to me that in normal language, everyday usage, I lied to you. I tried to mislead you. I said something that I thought wasn't true, right? But then you're going to say, well, no, you didn't lie, because the Bible has this line that says, because no lie is of the truth. But that means that what I said, well, it just seems to me that it's a bit weird,
Alex, let me help you out.
Yeah, sure, please.
Let me make it clear.
I'm dying there, please.
The passage says that the people know the truth. They know it. Okay? The situation that you're lining up is that you don't know it, but you accidentally hit it. You tried to lie, but it's actually the truth.
Exactly.
So the passage says these people know the truth.
It says, I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it. Right? And then comma, and because no lie is of the truth. So there's two reasons why I write to you. One is because you know the truth, right? Comma, and, but because you know it, and because no lie is of the truth. There's two becauses there. There's two reasons why. I'm just reading it. I don't know Greek. I don't know Aramaic or anything. Just that sentence, I write to you not because you know the truth. Okay, so it's saying not because you know, so you don't know the truth. Not because you, so if I write to you because you know the truth, that would be different. I write to you not because you know the truth, but because you know it. What? Hold on a minute. I write to you not because you do not know the truth.
So essentially it's saying that he's writing to them because they know the truth.
I write to you not because you do not know the truth, and not because you do not know the truth. So it's a double negation, but because you know it. Okay, great. Set that. So it's not because you don't know it. It is because you do know it. Fine. And because no lie is of the truth. Now, those two things are separate from each other, aren't they? Like, take the bit before the and take the bit after the and. They're giving you two reasons. It's like I'm saying, go and look for the money because here's a map that shows you, and because I know someone who told me where it is, and he said it's also there. There's two reasons why you should. Why I'm right. There's two reasons why I'm writing to you. One is because you know the truth, and the second one is because no lie is of the truth. Two reasons.
Okay,
right?
So now I think hopefully now we know what the verse says.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that the second reason, because no lie is of the truth, is just straightforwardly false. But you're saying, well, because I just said, lies and falsity are not the same thing. And my example was because I could accidentally say the truth.
A lie is falsehood.
Well, sorry, the doctrine of lying is falsehood.
No, the object of a lie is falsehood.
Yes, the object of lying is falsehood, but not necessarily the goal, not necessarily the outcome. I'm trying to tell you a falsehood, but it doesn't mean I am telling you a falsehood.
You'll need to speak a little slower because I'm on this tablet. It's not as loud.
So the object of a lie is falsehood, but not the outcome of a lie, not necessarily.
Well, what relevance does that have concerning the passage?
Well, and because no lie is of the truth is false. That's the relevance.
Why do you say that? Can you demonstrate it?
Yes. I can lie and say the truth at the same time. I already gave you that.
No, what you did was you whenever you gave me your hypothetical example, you talked about how someone could tell a lie or think they're telling a lie, but then it could turn out that the lie itself was actually true. Is that what you argued earlier?
Yeah, lying is about intending a falsehood.
Yes, but in the Bible it already tells us that the intention behind the lie is falsehood. That's why I told you at the very beginning, before you objected to me reading all this to you, that the passage that we're dealing with concerns the Antichrist, which are people that are antagonistic to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they come, and even though they pose as someone who supports what Jesus taught, in secret they're spreading lies and heresies. That is what is being talked about in that passage.
Good. I don't see that makes any difference to our disagreement, because I'm saying that
in your example, there's a fallibility constraint that you are inserting into your example, which is not applicable to the infallible Word of God. That's what I'm saying. So your example has nothing to do with what I just said. That's what I'm saying.
Right. If you, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm really sorry if I have interrupted you, because it's rude, and that's not how I want the content to come across. So, all I'm saying.
And now, Alex, before you, just so others know, and I think for you as well, I think that Jason is talking louder. He may not be aware of it because he's on a tablet, and so he may not know when you're speaking. There becomes slight delay. So just and that's not just for you, but for anyone listening. That they don't think that, Jason is raising his voice, I think, because he's on a tablet, not because he's, yelling at you. It does come across a little bit louder, but, and I think he's not hearing you when you.
Let me just say that it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I've had about 3-4 whiskeys, so that might be why I'm interrupting more than I should have been. So,
you sure they're not vodkas?
I'm pretty sure. They're either whiskeys or vodkas, though, so, look, all I'm saying is, like, if this disagreement comes down to what does lying mean? Because what lying means is relevant to whether or not that subclause of that sentence, which just says, you can forget about the and the because and everything that precedes it. It just says no lie is of the truth. And that seems to me straightforwardly just means no lie is true. Right? All lies are false. And if that's what it means, then it seems to me that it's false. The sentence is false, because lies can be false. Lies can be true. Like I said,
but that ignores the context of the passage. You're taking a statement and you're inserting your own context into it, and you're assuming your own definition of lying. You cannot use a different definition than what I am using or what the Bible is using in this instance. If we do not have a common definition, we cannot have meaningful dialogue. So either you can use the same definition of the Bible of lie, which I use, which I clearly laid out the context for why the term is used in that way and what it means, or you can use or you could keep using your definition of a lie. But if you keep trying to use a different definition than what the Bible is invoking, you're not attacking what the Bible says, you're actually lifting up your own proposition, which is not in the Bible, because the meaning of the proposition has been changed by the way that you are invoking the term lie and attacking that instead.
Yes, and I understand. So, firstly, I'm not making up a definition arbitrarily. I mean, I'm not just saying I want it to mean this. I'm using, normal everyday language. This is what it means. It just doesn't mean.
What do you mean by normal everyday language?
Well, I mean, I'm telling you that the treasure's buried under. I gave you an example. I mean, I could deliberately mislead you, and you would say that's a lie. I just don't understand. But look, forget that. Even if you think look, firstly, I'm just saying I reject the idea that I'm just arbitrarily changing it for the sake of making your argument wrong. I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is saying, look it up in a dictionary, any dictionary. It doesn't mean saying falsehood. It means intentionally misleading. I would bet my house on that. Anyway, but the dictionary, if your biblical definition disagrees with the dictionary definition, it's not like I can't move past that. I'll move past it, but the problem is if I do move past it, now all you're doing is saying, because no lie is of the truth, is a tautology. It's only true because it's true by definition. The only reason it's true by definition is because the Bible says it's true. So, of course, any passage you pick, because you start with it as an axiom that every passage in the Bible is true by definition, you pick any passage you like, and you may as well conclude that God exists as a result. The point is that if you're using an argument, you need to start from something that you and your opponent agrees to, and then move to the conclusion that you want to get to. I could start from the premise that God doesn't exist and define it by definition. I'll just pick as my axiom that God doesn't exist and conclude that God doesn't exist. Right? And I've won. I've won the argument. So
no, you haven't.
Well, I've picked it as my axiom. So how can you argue against it?
You want to pick that as your axiom, and we'll see how our dialogue goes.
Okay.
If you think you can defend it, I'll be happy to let you take that as your axiom. And
okay, here's my argument then. It's a one premise, one conclusion. It's God doesn't exist, therefore God doesn't exist. I've won.
No, you haven't.
How so?
How do you deal with the other problems in epistemology, such as how can you know that you can know anything at all?
Jason, wait a minute. This is a golden moment here, but Alex, Jason just asked you to form your argument, and you said God does not exist, therefore God does not exist, and that's it?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying if we're allowed to just pick an axiom, and, it's like if you say everything in the Bible is true by definition, then because it says that God exists in the Bible, it must be true by definition. I mean, I'm obviously not going to agree to that as a starting point.
So he asked you to pick your axiom. What axiom do you work off of?
I'm illustrating the redundancy of the method by saying we could just pick starting points that the other person won't agree to, and just declare that we've won the argument.
No, you don't declare that you won. You defend your axiom.
Well, it's unassailable I derive the conclusion that God doesn't exist from the premise that God doesn't exist. And because the premise that God doesn't exist is an axiom, it's true by definition. So it's unassailable by logic. I don't need to argue with you. It doesn't matter what you say. I've just derived P from P. So I don't understand where this is going. What I'm trying to do is to say if you're looking to, I suppose that maybe we should take a step back from the argument and reflect on what's going on at a wider level, which is maybe the Clarkian method in principle. Maybe this is my objection to the Clarkian method, is that like saying, I see the difference between the Clarkian method and the Van Tillian method, and I'm not an expert by any means in this particular area, of course, but what I'm seeing as the difference between the two of them is that the Van Til has at least a standard by which you can discriminate between two starting points. For instance, if you start with the starting point of atheism, for instance, then Van Til's central line is you're bound to lead in a contradiction somewhere along the lines. You know, you're reasoning in what's the term, as an internal critique of my position. Say you, Tim, for instance, were to adopt my atheist position, you as a Van Tillian, you'd be like, well, sooner or later I'm going to come up with a contradiction, and that will show you that the atheist position is inconsistent, so it can't be true. And then he'd say, well, look, jump into my worldview, and I'll show you from the Christian point of view that there are no inconsistencies. That must mean that it's true, right? That's at least a standard by which you can determine between two things. The problem with the Clarkian position is that, well, yeah, I can pick my unassailable axioms, and of course I can't assail you in any way if you just say, well, look, I'm just going to define this word to mean whatever the Bible says it means, and blah, 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 because you may as well just cut out all of the irrelevant stuff and just say, look, the Bible says that God exists, and the Bible's true, therefore God exists. And the rest of, like, looking at the context, looking at any verse, it doesn't really matter. You may as well just start with the axiom that God exists, and that's it. And then, so if that's your argument, then, you know, the problem with it, it's unassailable in a sense, but it's unassailable in the sense that, like, I can just say God doesn't exist, and that's unassailable. So the two things just ends up in each of us in our own isolated islands, just glaring at each other without any common ground. And, like, you know, you can hide in that environment where I can't touch you, but the problem with it is that I can hide in my environment, you can't touch me. Sorry, now I'll shut up.
Yeah, you're rambling. You made your point.
Thank you.
Jason.
Yes, sir.
Explain why you're arguing from the position of an axiom.
Well, first let me explain this. Alex, you know, whenever you should not talk about things, you know, you said you're not an expert on the subject, you know, but the articulation you gave of how Clarkian apologists argue is completely inaccurate. Have you read Dr. Clark at all?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so, you know, if you don't mind, let me explain how Clarkians actually argue. You know, it's just, you know, it's not a good thing to try and make assertions about things you have not read. It's just not good. I mean, you have a PhD in philosophy. You know, you should know. So, you know, please, you know, don't do that. But let me go ahead and explain how Clarkians actually argue. In regards to epistemology, we believe that we must start with a first principle, or an axiom, if you will. And these axioms are chosen because, you know, you cannot, if you arrive to the conclusion of an axiom, if the axiom is a conclusion that stems from a prior proposition, it is no longer an axiom. The way that we deal with opposing axioms is this. The law of contradiction is used as a negative test for truth. We will use a law of contradiction to show that the opposing worldview that is arguing from their own axiom, which we will grant whatever axiom they wish to argue from, we'll go ahead and grant it for the sake of argument. And then we'll show, using the law of contradiction, that their first principle they have chosen, by logical consequence, will lead them to a self-refuting skepticism. Once that has been established, we'll go ahead and present our axiom, and we will show that Christianity is logically consistent. And that is how we argue. And whenever someone sets out to have a discussion, it's up to that person that's presenting their side to determine what their own goals are. So, you know, whatever burden of proof that the other person wants, whatever may persuade them, is not relevant to whether or not the axiom has been defended. So we do actually engage other axioms. There are ways to show that it's false, or not that it's false necessarily, but that it results in skepticism. For example, you said, I start with my axiom, God does not exist, therefore God does not exist. Well, you have not demonstrated your axiom, because axioms, because their starting points are not demonstratable. So no, by assuming that God does not exist, you have not proven that God does not exist, you've only assumed it. Just as when I assume that the Bible alone is the Word of God written, I do not prove it. You know, nothing I have told you proves that the Bible is actually the Word of God. It's just a first principle. In regards to your objection concerning, well, I can just say that God doesn't exist. Well, that's fine, but then I'm going to start asking you questions about, you know, because what we want to do as Clarkians is see which axiom better deals with the problems of philosophy. That's what we're after when we're having a discussion. In regards to whether or not someone will actually believe because of our apologetic, that's up to God, because it's God alone that causes belief. Faith is a gift from God. So, you know, John 6:44, God draws people to himself. Matthew 16:17, Peter asked Jesus, "Who are you?" I mean, Jesus asked Peter, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter says, "Well, you're Christ, the Son of the living God." And then in Matthew 16:17, Jesus tells him that God has revealed this to him and not flesh. So that's just so concerning everything you said. That's my response to all those things.
Unfortunately, Alex had to leave.
Oh, well, I guess that's fine.
He may have made a trip to the men's room.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I guess he's not as interested in...
Way too much information.
Well, he's gone. All I know is his camera's still on. I heard him drop his mic.
He went through.
As helpful as Alex has been, it is past 3 o'clock in the morning where he is, and he has been drinking. And I don't know that it's the best time to have a real great conversation. What's else? He just left. Did anybody witness? Did he fall over or did he stand up and leave?
He said,
maybe he
chat.
got
He said,
for things he hasn't read.
He said, "Be right back. Let Jason back." Matt is back. So if we want to let Matt weigh in, while we're waiting for Jason on.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to listen too much because our company just left. And the wife is blind, the child is blind, so we had to help out, and no problem, but it's just what it was, so I didn't get to hear too much.
Headphones on. So I know, Tim, you wanna end the live hangout. This has actually gone longer than any of the other. Do we want to just let Matt and Alex?
I just got a concluding kind of a statement, not a big deal. I know it's late for him. But what I'm getting is it's the presentation of the argument that he's not satisfied with. It doesn't mean the argument's not valid. I would just say that it's not true. He'd like me to present it a different way. And I could see the A or the not A and things like that in negation. So I'll be thinking about it over the next few weeks about how to present it in a more cogent system. I still think it's valid, but I just appreciate Alex taking the time to explain that stuff. I just wish we got that one dash thing understood earlier, because that was really having a problem with it. But no problem other than that.
Matt, I just want to say real quick. Sure. I think it's very admirable and encouraging that you were so open to listening to other people.
Of course. Are you kidding? My philosophy, Slickianism, is over the years, people think I know all kinds of stuff. I don't know all kinds of stuff. I study, I can remember, I'm smart enough to be able to articulate a lot of things. I'll run them by people who know, and then I learn it, and I discuss it, and rise to the level of necessity, hopefully. But I've had Mormons say, "No, Matt, that's not our position." And then because of it, my arguments get better. I've had Roman Catholics say, "No, that's not our position either," which I appreciate. And so, if Alex, he's a polite atheist and who's got a degree in philosophy, and so I value that. I'm saying, okay, well, what's this? What's this? Why is that? I have no problem with that at all. I have no problem with being taught. I have no problem with being corrected. And now I understand what he's saying about with the way the argument is presented in those terms. Now I understand why he's disagreeing with that, but it doesn't. I don't believe it means the argument ultimately is invalid. I just need to present it, let's just say, in a better way, logically, I'll say, and not use. I see what he's saying, but not using the term disjunctive syllogism in that pattern. But I think a true dichotomy I can still use, making sure that I qualify it properly. So no problem. And I actually want to hear the Clarkian stuff too. I want you to teach me about the Clarkian stuff.
Sure, we can certainly talk about it sometime.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex. 30 seconds. What do you got? You want to say?
30 seconds. Okay, 30 seconds. I think that hopefully disjunctive syllogism with a dichotomy as first premise, it's never going to work. You need to stop that. It needs to be a different argument form altogether. I'll send you a paper.
That together.
Possibly. I'll send you a paper of a better version of a similar sort of argument. I'll send you a paper. I'll send you a philosophy paper published in Philosophy of Religion journal. Anyway, it's right up your street. You'd love it. I don't know if you've read it before. Maybe you won't, but whatever. Blah, blah,
Haven't
blah.
read it. Love to hear it.
Just wanted to make it as a closing. The argument certainly does reduce to triviality if it's exactly what you said. Disjunctive syllogism with a dichotomy as first premise, and the other way around, it's equally straightforward that it's a false dichotomy. The way that I had it read my blog. It's called Use of Reason. It's a WordPress, whatever. I don't care if you don't. It's also published on Skeptic Examiner. Please show me that I'm wrong. Whatever. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to speak to you again, Matt, if that's all right.
Sure. Oh yeah.
I'll send you an email so we can start a dialogue or whatever if you want to. I did Facebook you, so you have a message from me if you want to see it. But anyway, and so that's what I'd like to leave you with, Matt. That the argument's illogical for one of two fallacies. It's either false dichotomy or it's begging the question as it stands. So something needs to happen. And then with the Clarkian thing, I would like to say it would be better if we could. Maybe it's my fault for interrupting too much, but I would like to ask what makes the difference between what decides between two sets of axioms. What makes the difference between them? What makes one set of axioms good and one set of axioms bad?
That's what you do. That's what you do.
Yeah, that's something I explained whenever I can't see what you're doing because I'm on my tablet. But apparently you went away from the keyboard when I was talking, but I actually explained some of that.
Maybe I missed it. But can you quickly, just very, very quickly, what makes one? I mean, it's not the case that you can just pick an axiom, right? There's something that tells the difference between.
You can't begin if you haven't begun.
But what makes one starting point better than another?
What I would say, whenever I set out to do a dialogue, my goal is to show that if I start with the axiom of revelation, I can show that knowledge has to be possible and that it is logically consistent to think so. Whereas if someone starts with an unbelieving axiom, their worldview will, by logical consequence of them taking upon that axiom, will be reduced to skepticism.
And Alex, that is the basics. That is the basics. And I turned you down because I don't want you to ask another question. We're going to end the live broadcast. For those of you who are watching, there's about 60 of you watching right now. You can click on the link to listen on Mixlr. It's right there in the description of this hangout. Would love to have Alex on again, perhaps with Matt Slick or one-on-one with Jason Peterson to talk about it more. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, Matt Slick and Andrew. Yeah. Jason Peterson. Check those guys out. I'll try to put the links to all the different ministries in the description of this video. Until next week. Matt, did you say you're not going to be here next week?
Yeah, I have a debate in Houston, Texas on the charismatic gifts, and that's on a Saturday, and then Sunday I'm going to be going to Joel Osteen's church, and then I start flying back in the afternoon, so who knows what time I'll get back. But I think, what time will I get back, Meek? Oh, she's...
Tell Joel I said hi.
What's that?
I haven't heard from Joel in a while. Tell him I said hi.
Yeah, if you see a horizontal figure flying across the platform, tackling him, you'll know that's me.
And you're going to be meeting with, isn't there a debate? Oh, no, that's right, he dodged.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, folks, thanks for watching. Well, we will be on next week, more than likely, and even though Matt Slick won't be here, so look for that. Till next time, may God bless everybody. Thanks for watching.